Heck yeah. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Am I alive or what? Live again. Come on down. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Oh boy. There is so many things I need to do. There's so many things I need to do for my channel, for the brand, for a lot of things. I've got a lot of things I need to do. I'm slowly been working on that, but I'm trying. Okay. Oh, buddy. Oh, goody. Oh, goodness gracious sakes alive. Oh, boy. Alrighty, alrighty, alrighty. I am alive. Steely? Steely's trying to raid me, but he doesn't know how to do it because YouTube literally just came out with this feature a day ago, and no, I don't think anyone's actually done it yet. Hello, hello, hello. Ryan, what's Gucci? Hey there, what's Gucci Rivers? What's Gucci? How's it going? We're trying to figure out this weird YouTube raid thing. There's a plan for all of us D&D streamers. We all want to like get into a rotation of like hosting each other. Community. Live redirects allow. This option is disabled if your channel subscriptions are private. Are my channel subscriptions private? There we go. Are your subscriptions private? Oh man, while Sam's working on that, if anybody and anyone that hops in has any burning questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, complaints, need to be public, I believe. Hello, Kurt. Hello. As mentioned before, if anybody has anything, any comments, questions, concerns, complaints, gears they want grinded, feel free to hit me up. I am here to hear you out. I'm basically like your free, person to complain to. I'm here. I'm your person. What's the person that you go to complain about things? Oh, here we go. I'm running Cursestrahd currently, and your stuff has been great help. I've noticed MandyMod hasn't posted anything in about a year. Do you know if she's actually producing content? So semi recently, I'll go ahead and I'm gonna post all the comments in this for posterity here. But basically, I know for a fact that she was active semi recently, specifically in the Discord, but it wasn't in regards of like posting anything about like, oh, I'm doing new content or anything. She literally just hopped in just to say hi to people, and yeah, she didn't mention anything about posting new content. She didn't mention anything about doing anything, and I didn't want to ask because there's a reason. There's presumably a reason why she hasn't given an update on anything. So, to my knowledge, she hasn't made any sort of comment or any sort of thing about being producing more content for the Cursestrahd, which is unfortunate, but I'm willing to bet that there's a reason for that, right? I'm willing to bet that there is a reason why she has gone dark on this whole matter, which is unfortunate, but not much you can do about it. Because I know, in regards of the content creation for Cursestrahd, the big three were, MandyMod, Dragon Carta, and Lunch Break Heroes. Those three really were the pioneers in producing Cursestrahd content. My content that I produced wasn't additive to Cursestrahd. It was just, vertically, not even vertically, horizontally added to Cursestrahd. I was just there to help people with running it more along the lines of as written. Yeah, so it's honestly a shame. It sucks. I wish her the best of luck in anything and everything that she's getting up to, though. I really do. I really, really do. Thank you for the update. No problem. No problem. Yeah, like I said, I don't know why it has. She's gone dark. I don't know why. It's because at this point it's been like a year and change now, right? Like it's been a long time, unfortunately. And I know Dragon Jakarta, he's still doing a little bit of something here and there, but other than that, Lunch Break Heroes, he's already moving on to other things. And Touch the Bidoof. Touch the Bidoof. Bidoof. I always hate being the person that's always like, oh, I like the thing everyone hates, or oh, I hate the thing everybody loves. But I genuinely never understood the hate for Bidoof. I like, I thought Bidoof was perfectly fine. Bidoof is just, Bidoof is like the zigzagoon of this, newest generation, or not the newest generation, but of that generation. I did not think Bidoof was that bad. I think Bidoof is perfectly fine. I've heard you talking about OSR. Do you run these games? I see items you've made for 5e. So, yes, I regularly run OSR, and I am making products for OSR. I know that a lot of my videos, of course, have covered 5e. That's because that's where the views are. That's because, that's where all the fun shenanigans are. And I personally, I love OSR because I personally care more about the characters and I care more about the adventure. And I find that OSR facilitates a great way to make characters feel important and awesome because you're spending less time on combat, first and foremost. With 5e, 5e, whatever you may say about it, the fact of the matter is 5e combat just takes a long time. And the more time dedicated to combat there is, the less time there is dedicated to the other pillars of the game that I love so much, such as exploration and social interaction. And yeah, I absolutely love it. And I wish that we lived in a world where, it wasn't just 5e dominated the market, where everything else, got views and got the, subscriptions and got the buys and, all the products and all that fun stuff. But the fact of the matter is we currently live in a world where D&D is just the amalgamous term, and people show up to the hobby because they hear about 5e, everyone plays 5e, and people regularly don't move off of that thing. But I'm trying to push people to the OSR. I want to push people to the OSR, and eventually I want my channel to have, I want my channel to push people to the OSR. I definitely want to make more of a strive to that. It just takes a little bit of time. I've been really busy with a lot of things. I'm doing a lot of writing, but I'm making content for OSR right now. I'll be selling that stuff. I'll be making videos about it, and I can't wait. I absolutely love it. You should have links to these. I'm assuming they are on drive-through. No. Currently, they're in other people's hands, or they're going to be going somewhere. Probably on drive-through RPG because drive-through is fair, but maybe not. Hello there. Hello, Roland Crits. What a great name. Collateral Damage. What's your favorite D&D class? Oh boy. That's a really tough one. When you say D&D class, D&D means so many different things to so many different people. Is it all about the combat? Is it all about the exploration? Is it all about the role play? What does it mean? And what does the class offer to that? My personal favorite class for D&D is the fighter. And the reason for that is because I love the idea that in a fantasy world filled with magic and dragons and monsters and, terrible traps and all that fun jazz, you've got the wizard who embraces the magic, and then you've got, the cleric who calls down divine magic, and you've got all that stuff. But then you have the ordinary person who strives to become special And even though they are just a regular person, they are able to overcome those challenges. They're able to tackle the monsters and the dragons and the terrible traps. And that's the embodiment of human, resolve to be able to conquer anything. The fighter is just absolutely fantastic. And also so fighter is my favorite D&D class because, I think it's so great, being a fighter and you're dodging fireballs and lightning bolts, and then you're dipping through dragon breaths and you're charging your way through the dungeon, and you're able to outlast everyone else. Because, the barbarian can last a long time, but certain effects, certain magics that hit them, they're done for. But the fighter, just through and through, true and true, is typically the last man standing, and I love that. Hey, Steven. And also, something I'm going to do is I should write write my, answers for these. So, for the first one, she updated a bit ago, but not much else. I've heard I love OSR. What's your favorite D&D class? Fighter. And also my terrible typos. I love it. I absolutely love it. Alrighty. Hey, Steven. Mimo, how would you go about making a player character the big bad of a campaign? I have a PC who willingly ended up getting possessed by God of Destruction, so I was wondering if you think this could happen. Absolutely. I play a human in RL. Boo you! Raid! Woohoo! It's coming through. We're getting the totally not copyrightable YouTube redirect, which is not, you cannot call it a raid. That's illegal. YouTube will smite you for dare calling it a raid. How dare you? And also, how did I copy D happen? What? What? How is that possible? How is that possible? Raid, do you have a setting you've created yourself? Do you, what's the next module you plan on covering? Yes, I'll be getting those. Alrighty, so, how would you go about making a player character the big bad of a campaign? I have a PC who willingly ended up getting possessed by God of Destruction, so I was wondering if you think this could happen. So, what I would do is, I would say that this god, even though they're possessing this human, they cannot, or, because they're possessing this human, they cannot all of a sudden just, god mode activate. What I personally would do is, I would have the character be basically sent on a quest to unlock the vestigial powers of the gods. And that would be basically the players, the characters, the party, basically unwittingly be making this god of destruction powerful. And I think this can be done tastefully. The whole idea of one player, air quote, being a traitor to the party that can suck if it's executed poorly. But I think it can be done wonderfully. I think here what you would do is you would try and set up, the fact that they need to go on these quests and they think that they're doing it for a noble cause. But in reality, they're going to get they need to find these vestiges, found all about. They either need to go to holy temples or ancient underground, whatever. They need to collect these items. And then once the player is in possession of all of them, then they turn. And then very, very quickly, and I'm talking about within one session, they get into the climactic finale so that they don't have to deal with, the whole, one player versus the others. Another thing you could also look at, too, is what I would recommend is if it is going to be an extended period of time for the big bad to rise up, what I would strongly suggest is that the player picks up another character, and that way, they hand over the character to you, you become this big bad, and then the player is still on the other players' teams, because you always want the players to always be on their own team. Have them search for vestiges and work together unwittingly. That's what I would say. That's how I go about it. Any plans to cover Strixhaven? Yeah, I'll be getting to all these. PCs can totally be the big bad. It all depends on how the rest of society sees them, for sure. Or the PCs can set up some rival of the bad guy. Basically, Curse of Strahd. Exactly, right? Exactly. Alrighty, let me copy pasta some of these questions. Because I cannot. Well, you know, something I see all the, the big famous other YouTubers have is they have a mod team. And what they do is whenever it's like they're doing Q's and A's, their mod team basically sends them a private thing to look at. And then of course there's the people that have the super chats or whatever, and then they get to bump the line if they do all that. I unfortunately am not a famous streamer. I'm not the big streamer, and I also don't have a mod team. I don't have any of that fun jazz. So I'm working on it, people. I'm working on it. Do you have a setting you've created yourself? Yes. I have several settings that I've created to myself. I do need to write them down, though. I should write them down and provide them to the people if they desire it. But basically, some of the settings, to give you an example of the settings that I've created, were such things as basically one major mega continent, and this mega continent just has a whole bunch of factions going to war. And it's a pretty simple premise. You're basically, the characters can always get caught up in all these, major kingdoms always going to war against each other, and whenever any sort of dynasty ever rises up on this continent, basically the gods just smite the continent and restart it. So you're basically in one of these droughts of there is no major dynasty kingdom. There's only like small pockets, small little kingdoms here and there. So I've definitely done some stuff. I have done some stuff. I need to write it. Need to write it out. Yeah, you don't have those things yet. Even I have mods. Well, Pone, that's because you're famous. And no, Pone, not only are you famous, but you are also famous adjacent. You're actually friends with some really big people. And that helps out a ton. You are friends with some of the biggest in the Total War sphere. And that'll go a long way if you ever actually applied yourself to becoming a content creator. Which I know you could definitely be a great content creator if you actually applied yourself, Pone. But you're just too lazy. You need to strap your boots up and start creating some content. Okay? I know you have it within you, Pone. What is the next module you'll plan on covering? So, for those of you that don't know, I typically have covered a lot of the 5e adventure modules. At this point, I've covered, I believe, 6. Let's go down the rabbit hole here. Tomb of Annihilation, Curse of Strahd, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, Candlekeep Mysteries. I've only covered 6. Oh, and my plan was I wanted to go down the laundry list and do all of them. But there is an unfortunate thing that's going on in that Wizards of the Coast is becoming way too big. And unfortunately, what's happening with them is they, or not unfortunately, I guess, but they are going to be able to start churning out more and more adventure modules constantly. And, the thing about it is, and for those of you that didn't watch my last live stream, I say that all the time, and I'm trying to cut back on it. The thing about it is but basically it takes me a few months to do one of these adventure module runs, and what's gonna happen is unless I literally just quit doing everything else and just buckle down, I will not be able to catch up. There's no way, especially once I got to some of the bigger modules, such as if I did Dungeon of the Mad Mage. That would take forever to do in the format that I do, covering modules. It would be ridiculous. So unfortunately, I think that there is some of the adventure modules I'm just going to have to kind of leave by the wayside. And, but I also do want to cover some more. So I was basically narrowing it down to three, and I'll go ahead and write these out for you. Tales from the Yawning Portal, um, Baldur's Gate, and the Critical Role one, Call of the Netherdeep. And the reason why I've basically narrowed it down to those three is because I really like Tales from the Yawning Portal. I've ran all of those things, and they're all old school stuff, and I absolutely love them. Baldur's Gate, the reason why I would want to touch that is because, one, my name is actually in that book. Fun fact, my name is actually in that book. But more importantly, I think that there's a lot of things that Baldur's Gate does wrong, and, I think it'd be a good way to basically dive into that and say, hey, this is totally sucks. Let's fix it up. And three, Call of the Netherdeep is because, one, it's the newest thing. Two, because it's Critical Role. And three, I think it is a genuinely unique setting. So once I do start, production on the next one, it is either going to be Tales from the Yawning Portal, Baldur's Gate, or Call of the Netherdeep. You have more subs than I? Pwn, I only have more subs than you because I make content. If you actually sat down and made content, you would have a lot of subs, especially because you could leverage your friends. Pwn, you could be a huge YouTuber if you actually tried. If you actually wanted to. You've got your friends in high places. You've got, the funny comedic chops. You've got the content just sitting right there. The only thing that needs to happen is you need to apply yourself. That's it. There's the catchphrase. The thing about it is there's a ton of new ones coming down the line. I'm sure Netherdeep and new ones coming out would be good view getters. That's the other thing too is, admittedly, if I do the newest one, then I'll have the most views, right? Technically, no. When I covered Candlekeep Mysteries, even though I covered it literally the day of, I was releasing videos that the very day it was coming out. Unfortunately, Candlekeep Mysteries did not get the views. Even still, it's still one of my least viewed ones, even though it was relatively new in the lifespan of D&D. Now, in regards of Call from the Netherdeep, I think that there is definitely a decent amount of people that could watch it, especially if I start doing the clickbait of it's Critical Role, and put Matt Mercer's face in the thumbnail or whatever. But at the same time, the unfortunate issue is that modules just natively are module views, module guides, module whatever are just natively going to get less views than what the other YouTubers are covering. The other YouTubers are covering general advice, or they're doing comedy skits, or they're doing, top 10 herpy derpy diddly D's. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for some people, I guess, those just get more views. What's going to get more views, right? Part 13 of a module review guide, or 13 things I hate about players? I'm willing to bet 13 things I hate about players is going to get more views. You know what I'm saying? Is there a star problem? Is there an issue? Alrighty. Well, for me, there's no issue, is what I'll say. So any plans to cover Strixhaven? So Strixhaven came out, and I only made 2 videos about it, I think. One of the videos got a lot of hate, though. One of my videos was about the spell that came out with it. Silvery Barbs. And that video was one of my most disliked videos for a little bit. Because people were day zero banning that spell. People hated that spell. People hated whatever. But other than that, I didn't actually cover, the actual place of Strixhaven. I didn't cover the adventure itself. I didn't cover any of it. And I actually, I sat down and was like, man, should I actually even, cover, running this module? And when I actually ran through it, I discovered that I don't know if I should. It'd be a really quick series, that's for sure. But I don't think it needs my touch because the Strixhaven adventure is one of the most railroaded adventures there. It's your players just showing up to the next scene and dealing with it, and then moving on to the next scene and dealing with it. There really isn't that much autonomy. And trying to basically, like, if I actually wanted to sit down and be like, oh, hey, here's how we make the Strixhaven campaign, more fun. Basically, it would be regutting the whole campaign. It'd be transforming this roller coaster style of adventure into something that it's not. And quite frankly, I'd rather just, expend my energy on something else besides Strixhaven, because I don't even know if Strixhaven was even that popular. I really wish we could see, I wish we could see, like, metrics on what books are selling, and I wish we could see, how much people are still currently playing these adventures and stuff, but I don't think Strixhaven got much love, so, I'm just gonna say currently no, sadly. I don't know if the love is there from the community. It's unfortunate because, like, Magic School has the potential to be so great because, let's face it, Harry Potter, really revolutionized the whole Magic School thing. Harry Potter was not the first Magic School setting, and it is not the best Magic School setting. It's just the most popular. I'll say that. And I think that there should be a really cool one. It's funny because I was actually genuinely, like, writing down some stuff for a supplement I called Mordenkainen's School of the Arcane. And wouldn't you frickin' know it, like, right in the middle of, like, writing that, I actually got a bunch of the Strixhaven came out. So I was like, oh, man. More dragons. Hey, more dragons, the better, right? I'm starting a campaign in a few weeks, and to get the pieces together, I was thinking that they be summoned by a dream spell and are marked in the dream as servants of the queen, aka Lady of Pain. That is something that I know for a fact, if 5e came out with, like, today, that would get a bunch of money. Planescape. If they made a Planescape adventure where you're in Sigil, or Sigil, I guess. I hate saying Sigil, even though Sigil is technically correct. But if they came out with either an adventure in Sigil, or if they came out with, like, the whole book on, like, here are the factions and here are all the notes and everything you need to run a Sigil adventure, that would be fantastic. I know for a fact that would sell because people love Planescape, people love the Lady of Pain, people love, the city itself, people love that stuff, but unfortunately they just haven't done that yet. It's really weird. Like, companies are really weird when it comes to making money because I just don't get why companies make the certain things the way that they do, right? Like, for example, being Strixhaven. Strixhaven, from a sense of trying to bring in new people into the fold, whether that be D&D people getting into Magic or Magic people getting into D&D, I understand why they did that. I just don't think it actually works. I genuinely would love to know, like, the metrics of how many people picked up Strixhaven and were like, you know what, I really want to play Magic the Gathering, and then consequently, I wonder how many Magic the Gathering people were like, Strixhaven, oh, maybe I should play a D&D game because that was my favorite set. I don't know how many people actually say that. I don't know how many it is, but I'm willing to bet it's a very small fraction. Admittedly, the more people that they can get into Magic the Gathering, the better, because people that get into Magic the Gathering typically spend a lot of money. And when it comes to any, collectible card game, it's always good business for them to try and find those whales. It's 0. It's a goose egg. It's admittedly got to be, like, an incredibly low number, right? I just don't get it. It's tough, right? Because, like, they Wizards of the Coast, they want to make money, and they've got these two humongous, products. They've got Magic the Gathering. They have Dungeons and Dragons. They have some of the most iconic names in nerding business. Nearly every nerd ever has heard of either D&D or Magic the Gathering. Nearly everyone, right? And so they're always trying to like cross those lines. Is there a frog king or queen in D&D? Yes, there is actually. There is. There's bullywug. So there's at this point there's like 3 different frog variants. In Dungeons and Dragons, there is bullywugs, grung, and gripply. And in regards of like, is there one for all? No. But there is definitely like, there is whole factions and whole, kingdoms dedicated to these, frog peoples, whether they be, bullywugs, gripply, or grung. In fact, can I say the N-word in here? Heck no. You can say no. That's the only N-word you can say. But is there a frog queen D? Absolutely there is. It's funny, I play a game system called Dungeon Crawl Classics, and there is in fact a frog god, and if you become a patron of this frog god and you cast spells, sometimes like some weird things can happen to your character, and like they can either like grow a long tongue, or they can get bulbous eyes or sticky, hands or whatever and stuff like that. So that's definitely something cool that happens. In the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, they have a whole bullywug court. They did. Really wish they'd given me an Innistrad module. Right, like, of all the... Magic the Gathering, over the past however many years, has been pumping out a ton of different settings. They, a bunch of different places, a whole bunch of different portions, a whole bunch of different whatever, right? And I want to say for like the past 4 or 5 years, they've been doing a pretty good job. They've had a really nice variety. They've got a decent storyline going on. They've got a bunch of cool things, right? And Innistrad just came out recently, and basically the whole thing with that is there's vampires and werewolves, and the most recent of those sets was the Crimson Court, which is basically a wedding. Like, that right there could be a fun adventure module if there's a whole thing about a wedding. Maybe it doesn't have to be a full-blown, 300-page adventure module. But if they just printed a adventure about that whole premise, they could make money. But this also goes into something else I want to discuss about Wizards of the Coast, design philosophy here is they are only pumping out adventure modules that are, 100 to 300 pages. I personally believe that if Wizards of the Coast, went back to some of their roots of printing out 10 to 30 page adventure modules, they could put in less effort but get a lot more sales. If they instead of trying to like make a niche of like, oh hey, we're gonna have a jungle adventure, here's Tomb of Annihilation. Instead of that, what if they had printed out, just a few handful, that didn't require as much proofreading, that didn't require as much editing, didn't require as much art, didn't require this much that, and this or whatever. I think that they could make a pretty decent selling. But they just sadly have moved away to this whole idea of only big books, and I don't want only big books. I don't want that. If you're asking about a stat block, the Ghost of Saltmarsh book has a Bullywug Monarch stat block. It does indeed, yes. Why? Why can't I say that word? What's wrong with expressing myself? The problem with expressing yourself is, no one wants to hear it. I just got the idea of frog staff. It's a normal wand, but it shoots frogs, not the poisonous kind, just normal frogs. That right there is a great, that's a great, like, one thing I always strongly recommend is never just give your players a free item. Have a story associated with that item. If they get into a chase, like let's say they're in a swamp and they're dealing with like a swamp mancer who's like, dealing with a whole bunch of weird, creepy shenanigans in the swamp. And then they get into this chase and they're fighting crocodiles. And then there's like some weird troglodyte in the tree that hops down. And the swamp mancer is firing off frogs at them through a wand. That's going to be a great story. Because from then on, one, they're going to have a wand that has, shoots out frogs. But two, every time they look at it, they can be reminded of that fun adventure they had. Oh, hey, do you remember when we had to chase that swamp mancer in the swamp, and then, someone got their, like, foot, stuck in the swamp water, and then someone else got swallowed by the giant toad, Like, that could be fun. Wizards of the Coast never did that, though. It was TSR who did it back in the day. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that the reason why TSR, inevitably ended up getting the situation that they got themselves in was because they just were spread way too thin, right? Like, they were doing too many settings. They were doing too many weird things. And Wizards of the Coast right now, basically, they're playing it air quote safer by petering out their releases over time. But instead of having one major release every 4 months or so that people may or may not enjoy, I think it could be a good idea to, like, have a decent, or maybe not decent, but like a minor release every 2 weeks that you may or may not enjoy. Because as of right now, they spend all this time, money, and effort on a 300-page adventure module or supplement or whatever. And then there's people that are natively just going to get it, and there's people that are natively just not going to get it, right? And it's such a huge gamble, I think, just producing big amounts of content. I like small adventures, and I think moving down to instead of having a book of 14 or 17 adventures, I think it'd be just better just for them to release one adventure at a time, and you can pick it up one at a time. Also, nickel and diming people can be a better business practice than trying to have them buy one big thing. That is also a possibility. On a serious note, when are we getting desert setting module, the most neglected setting? Yeah, so that's something that we always speculate about, right, in regards of the adventure modules, because we look and we say, okay, they've had a adventure all about the jungle. They've had the adventure all about the frozen north. They've had the adventure all about hell. They've had the adventure all about being in a city, right? And so one of the most one of the biomes that they're missing currently is the desert. Another biome that they're missing would be celestials. Like they haven't touched celestials at all. They touched fiends and they've touched devils and demons, but they haven't touched angels really. So there's that to look at. Me personally, I love deserts. I love the desert biome. I love the desert heat. I love it all. And especially in the fantasy world that is D&D, there could be a absolutely awesome desert adventure. Now, the reason why I don't believe that there has been a desert adventure is because 5e has next to no rules on exploration of a area, and there is next to no rules on exploration in regards of surviving. There's very, very few survival mechanics in 5e, and I think that basically if you had like a desert setting where it's like, okay, it's, on average it's 100 degrees and you have to drink this much water, and if you don't rest up this many number of times, then you suffer an incident or whatever. Like, if they have to throw all those rules into a book, I think a lot of people are just going to ignore it. And if you ignore those survival mechanics and rules, that has a vastly different outcome on the journey, on the adventure. Because if two people run the same adventure, but one's using hardcore, super duper survival roles, and one group is just, running a generic 5e adventure, there are going to be two different outcomes. Even though you're running the same exact adventure, two totally different outcomes, two totally different feels, two totally different tones and styles and settings and things like that. So I think the reason why is because of 5e hardcore rules aren't there. That being said, they don't need to have, a hardcore desert setting adventure, right? They could have a lighthearted, high fantasy, high octane, adventure in the desert for sure, right? Like, it could be all about you getting on the back of dragon turtles that are running around the desert. It could be, the desert has, the sunshine and rainbows, right? It could be those things, but I don't know. I never had the opportunity to see a blue dragon. Yeah, I mean, that's what deserts are for. having a minor release every 2 weeks that's called Dungeon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine, and both of those went the way of the dodo. So they went the way of the dodo, right? Like Dungeon and or Dragon Magazine and Dragon Plus and all that fun jazz. Or I guess there is like a Dragon Plus now. But there is clearly a demand for magazines because of things like Matt Colville, because of things like, some of the things that I'm creating for Patreon. And many of the other YouTube content creators are, in fact, creating monthly magazines filled with advice and filled with subclasses and new classes and monsters and adventure settings and new mechanics and this and that. So there is clearly a demand for it. I think that if Wizards of the Coast really wanted to, they could have continued the legacy of Dungeon and or Dragon Magazine by having a monthly thing of, fun little additions to the game and whatnot. But they just stopped. And in their place, obviously, a new market came in. And, I don't know if Wizards of the Coast is feeling like they want to compete with Matt Colville and all the other D&D YouTubers and content creators and whatever else. I genuinely don't know. But there certainly is the possibility. And just like, that's honestly another thing. It's going to lead down another tangent here. Wizards of the Coast, they hire these people and then they're there forever and all the time because they have these humongous releases. Wizards of the Coast could genuinely feel out new content creators. Instead of doing things like, Candlekeep Mysteries and Radiant Citadel, instead of doing releases like that, they could do the Dragon Magazine, where they hire on someone for 1 month and say, hey, you've got 1 month, you're going to make a new mechanic, or you're going to make a new adventure, or you're going to add new monsters to the game. And that right there would be so great, because then you could immediately feel out, okay, what's their content creation style like? Do people genuinely enjoy the content they're creating, and are we going to use them for later? And, it's a simple release, right? Like, you say, you release it, and it's like, okay, we released this, Dragon 52, right? Oh, hey, people really like the monsters in this one, and the monsters were all created by so-and-so creator. Let's hire them again. That right there is just such a great way to get content creators on board. So great. And it annoys me that Wizards of the Coast doesn't want to do that. It annoys me greatly. Hopefully 5.5, or whatever they're calling it, addresses the lack of mechanics for the other two pillars of D&D. Yes, I agree. In regards of that, just recently on Twitter, there's been a big-ish discourse on social interactions and should that be a game mechanic. Now, throughout the entirety of D&D's lifespan, and I'm going all the way back to original D&D, AD&D, D&D 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all, every edition of D&D ever. Every single one of them has bounced around in regards of what the social interaction rules are. Now, going from 3rd edition and up, it's been more so relegated to persuasions and intimidations and things like that. And beforehand, it was more along the lines of affecting reaction rolls and number of retainers that you're allowed to have by your side and all that stuff. But there has always been social interaction rules. There are other game systems that have actual social interaction rules. There are other game systems that actually have codified things of how you do social interaction. Now, the reason why it's been a big discourse on Twitter recently is because, one, Twitter always has a discourse over everything, because that's just how Twitter works. But two, it's been a debate of, does it need to be fleshed out? Do we need to have rules on how to talk to other people? The sad part is, some people... I'm going to walk that back. I'm not going to say the sad part is. What I'm going to say is, for some people, yes, some people do need those social interaction rules. Because, quite frankly, there is some people who want a game that it's more mechanical heavy. There are some people who do not want to actually engage in that social interaction. There are some people who do want their character to be reflected in their social interaction. And I'm, if you ask the average person, the average person, whoever they are, I'd be willing to bet to say that they probably don't take into consideration what, charisma means when they run 5e. I think most people just typically just run the character however they want, and the charisma, comes into effect when you have to make a saving throw or something like that. But I definitely think that there could be, potential for D&D to open up to social interaction rules and have them be optional or not for the people that want them. I definitely think that's a possibility. What was the most absurd D&D campaign you were in? So that's a tough one to say because I have mostly only ever DM'd. I have been a player, and I currently am still a player. But to what I'll say is, what was the most absurd D&D campaign I was in? Man, that's a tough one. I ran an Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign, and things got a little bit wonky. They had to I had to go completely off the rails because the campaign started at 11 or 12, and like that campaign is designed to like end at 11, so I had to like scale everything up, and things got pretty wonky then. So I'll say my scaled up Rime of the Frost Maiden. Things went from levels 11 to 15. Yeah. How's it going? How's it going, Ma? Ma Deeps. I'm fan-freaking-tastic. How about yourself? I've been having a good time. I've just been talking and complaining about Wizards of the Coast approach to content creation and all that fun jazz. I've just been thinking about ways that they could potentially improve and how they could incorporate more people into the hobby and this and that. Funniest moment? Man, what has been the funniest moment? I've had some really funny moments. And I've had, I've had a lot of dumb players do dumb things, and it's always like that's the best, when D&D is all about that, right? Here's what I'll say. I think one of the funniest moments ever was probably what I did for a campaign was, or for Tomb of Annihilation, is I give the players a retainer, and basically the retainer shows up to the party and says, hey, you guys are cool. I want to be like you. I want to be an adventurer just like you, but I'm a nobody. Can you teach me how to become somebody? And for all the groups that I've ran it for, they've all approached how to raise up this retainer named Gerald. How they approach making Gerald the coolest retainer ever. And one group, which was in fact Professor Pone's group, they made him the tank. Another group, they made him the healer. But this funny moment here was with a group. And instead of them coming to a consensus on, hey, we should make Gerald the tank, we should make him the healer, we should make him the DPS. Instead of them coming to a consensus, what ended up happening was every single one of them said, I want Gerald to be like me. The druid says, I want Gerald to be a druid. The paladin says, I want Gerald to be a paladin. The fighter says, I want Gerald to be a fighter. The monk says, I want Gerald to be a monk. And that created some of the funniest moments because the party was just fighting each other over this retainer's affection. They would all try and steal him away and try and teach him. They'd all try and show off in front of this nobody. And it just created some of the dumbest situations because, even though they're on the same team and they're trying to raise this guy up, basically he was just like, oh, which way do I go? What do I become? And so I had to write up like a little like gameplay mechanic on the side of who was earning the most like points with Gerald. And I was keeping track of that the whole time. It was a blast. Retainer hogging. Yeah, that created a whole bunch of just dumb scenarios, and that was just a blast. What was the stupidest thing a player has done? What part of D&D do you enjoy the most? I'll be getting to those. Don't you worry. It's honestly a blast when the players come together and maybe not even like the best part about D&D is like I'll get to that moment, but the part right there that made that so funny was just like them just getting each other's grills the whole time. That was fantastic. Alrighty, so what's the stupidest thing a player has done? Oh my god. I've had some really dumb players do some really dumb things. My god. Pone probably might remember this. I don't know if you remember this, Pone. But I was running a West Marches game, and in this West Marches game, there was like 30 some odd people regularly playing in this campaign, and by the end of it, we had 82 dead PCs. But there was one session where basically I told people that there was this well of water, and if you touch the well of water, the water basically climbs up your body and tries to drown you. And this person basically climbed above it and tried diving down into it. And I said, okay, because he dived into it, you start drowning. And, that right there was just like, okay. Okay, let's just wrap this up. And naturally, the PC died. The PC died a very, very stupid death. But that's what we were there for. Drowning in totally drowning water. That was pretty dumb. I'm not gonna lie. I remember one Beck Me campaign I played in. My elf leaped out of a second story of a barn, sword in hand, trying to especially kill the goblin leader and a group of goblins riding direwolves. Crib failed and faceplanted in the mud in the middle of the pack of direwolves, got torn asunder. Oof. And mind you, back then in Beck Me, it's still the 2d6 points of damage for the falling, but back in those days, your health was a lot less. So that probably was not the best time. Ooh, another good question there. Do you prefer D&D online or in person? I'll be getting to that momentarily. So, what part of D&D do I enjoy the most? What I'll say is the part about D&D that I enjoy the most is the mystery. And not just the mystery of like, oh, we gotta solve, Jinkies gang, we gotta solve this mystery by looking for clues. No. The mystery of not knowing. The worst part about playing a video game for me is I know what's around the corner, right? I know how to handle a situation. For example, being Elden Ring. Elden Ring's pretty topical. When I go to the next room in Elden Ring, I typically know, okay, like, there's gonna be, like, an enemy right there, and I know how to solve it. I'm gonna beat them up. And, yeah, that happens a lot in D&D, but more importantly is when you don't know when something's gonna happen. What is around the corner? Is it gonna be a goblin, or is it gonna be a dragon? Is that person that we're talking to that's sending us on this quest, are they actually, on the up and up, or are they, screwing with us? Did that retainer that we get, are they going to live and become, my class, or are they going to die a horrible death? That mystery, the not knowing of what's going to happen next, is the part I enjoy most about D&D. And that's especially coming from me as the DM, because I am a full-time lifer DM. I love presenting scenarios for my players so that I do not know the answer of how they're going to solve it. I love presenting a world and saying, hey, here is your quest, but you may decide to do something wonky. You may decide to go off the rails. You may decide to, instead of like going across the bridge, maybe try to go under it, right? I love that. So for me, the thing I enjoy most about D&D is the mystery of not knowing what's going to happen. And what and how my players will solve problems. That's what I enjoy most about D&D. Don't think I was there for that. Okay. What part of D&D do you dislike the most, or think needs improvement? Ooh, there's a lot to get into with that one. I'll be getting to that momentarily. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. But let me catch up on chat here. Speaking of falling, a fun random encounter is Orbital Drop Dwarf. Has levels of Drunken Master Monk, so reduced fall damage, and Totem Barbarian, so reduced damage total. Absolutely. Have him get dropped by a flying creature he's upset through the roof of a tavern or house where the party are staying to dust themselves out and ask for a pint. Absolutely. There was also when they were trying to out the Mystic, which totally didn't land because Mike Merles got canceled, and Mike Merles was the guy working on that. The Mystic had a whole feat of like if they can like negate damage if they fall like 1,000 feet or less or something like that. It was pretty nuts. One time I was playing a Dark Elf and my friends was playing a Goliath and stole a child from cultists who was acid proof and proceeded to raise it until the campaign ended. That's the way to go. Is the best magic item you have ever given your players the Rock of Gravity detection? I'll tell you what, that's one of the greatest items I've ever given. But I'll be getting to that momentarily. Oh, God. That child was acid proof, mind you. Hey. I find too many players know too much these days. They know all the monsters, and when they get attacked, they're like, oh, that's the insert monster, and this is how we kill it. No mystery or awe. Yeah, and that's something I want to address in some of the products that I'm coming out with is to give you all basically a what do you call it thing? To give you all a little preview here of some of the stuff that I'm working on. For my zine, which I'll go ahead and produce, show this off here. When it comes to my monsters, I have them have random attacks. So that way, like, even I don't know what the heck they're going to be doing. And the reason I do that is because I want to add randomness back into the game. I want there to be totally just nonsensical nonsense. And another thing I'm working on, too, is I'm working on layers and dungeon effects and things of that nature. And what I want with that is basically if you're fighting in a lair or a dungeon or wherever, then there's going to be not only is there going to be like a lair action on initiative count 20 or 10 or whatever, but there's also going to be things of like, oh, hey, as if you're fighting in the bandit hideout, the bandits get a free, disengage action or something like that. I want things like that. So let me try and let me try and get this to look here. And nope. There we go. Nope, I don't want to move that. I don't want to move that. There we go. So things like that. So right here you can see on this thing here, varied attack. Horn and hoof, it's just it attacks your AC. But then the Mighty Slam, the creature has to make a strength saving throw, or they take that much damage, or in blah, 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 this and that. The Bull Charge, each creature in a 20-foot row that the 8-bull runs through has to make a dexterity saving throw, or else they get battered out of the way. The Horrifying Snort, the creatures within range have to make a wisdom saving throw or be frightened. I love these things because when you look at, if I threw a dart at the monster manual, it's going to say multi-attack, 2, claws, 1 bite. That, I promise you, if you threw a dart at the monster manual, it's going to land on a monster that has those attacks and that's it. So I want to be doing more stuff like this that introduces more varied mechanics other than just targeting AC, because targeting AC gets real old real quick. So that's a little sneaky preview on all that fun jazz there. Let me catch up on that there. Just do what I do, change the monster stats and mess with the players. Yeah, I highly encourage that, by the way. Like, it may sound like confrontational or even adversarial to like mess with monsters, but something I find that really helps out with that is just reskinning the monster. Instead of it being a 10-foot troll, green skin, lengthy arms, instead make it a purple, 6-legged, arachnid-looking thing. You can literally keep the stats. You don't have to change anything for your own convenience. You just literally change the description of it, and your players are going to be like, oh, man, this is crazy. What are we going to do about it? And you can just run it as is. That really helps out. They've done adventure books for most of the Sword Coast locations, but not Neverwinter. Pitch us a Neverwinter book with a cool tagline. I'll actually be doing that, absolutely. Funnily enough, I've actually thought about that, so I'm glad I thought about that a little while ago, because I'll be doing that. Example, Neverwinter, it came from beyond the plains. I met Volo in Baldur's Gate 3. He makes things up. Him and Xanathar and Fizzbands aren't reliable sources, so DM can have stats however they want. Absolutely. Alrighty. Do I prefer D&D online or in person? While both have pros and cons, and if they feel their accessibility online makes play my preference. Here's my preference. I'm genuinely 50-50 about this. One, when you're playing in person, there is an energy in the air that you all can feel. You can mess with people, you can wave your arms about, and you can have these inflections, and you can use practical effects that you just cannot do online. And most important of all is just the vibe and feel of people in the room is just fantastic. Now, online has the tremendous benefit of being able to play with people that you would never be able to play with. One of my players is here, Professor Pone. That dude lives halfway across the, states from me, because I live in California and he lives all the way over in not California. And the fact that I get to play with people that I would have never been able to play with, maybe even 20 years ago or so, that's awesome. I freaking love it. And that, and not only that too, but there's also a ton of great things you can do online in regards of having rollable macros, in regards of changing maps on the fly, in regards of pulling up online resources, which, yes, you can do in person if you've got the resources for it, if you've got a cool tablet or whatever. But if you're like me and you're poor, then you cannot do that, right? If you're like me, you don't have the fancy tablet or the TV stand or whatever. Whenever I play in person, mind you, whenever I'm drawing up your little icon or token or whatever, I let you draw your character. But for me, all my monsters are stick figures. And sometimes they're round to indicate that they're fat. And sometimes if they're really thick like a giant, then instead of them being a stick figure, they get actually 2 extra lines on the side to denote that they're bigger. So they each have their pros and cons, yes. And I don't have a preference. I am just always down to D&D, or, I say D&D as the amalgamous term. I'm down to do most tabletop role-playing game systems. So I'm going to say I don't have one. They are both great. That's a real cop-out answer, I know, but it is what it is. I'm lucky in that regard. My setting Kalimport hasn't been used for ages, so I have monsters in my setting. The Hotori. What are your thoughts on the Hotori Forgotten Realms wiki? Let me grab that little comment there. Hello, a player in my party has been on a streak of bad luck dice rolls for the past 2 sessions. They seem like they're not having fun anymore because they feel useless, mainly in combat. I know bad dice rolls are supposed to be part of a game, but what are some tricks the DM to raise their spirits without blatantly changing the roll in their favor? I'll definitely be getting to that in a moment, because that is an excellent question, and I believe I'm going to have an excellent answer. Totally not to toot my own horn here. Oh! Why is that... Oh, you know what? If I copy, all the way through, it copies the dumb little tag there. That's stupid. Let me get rid of that, too. That's really dumb. Okay. I'm planning on doing a Back Me campaign for my 5e players, asked if there was anything they need to read up on the world. I told them that I'd give them the info they needed for the rest to discover. As they should. I honestly, I love when both the players and the character are discovering the world together. I absolutely love that. Alrighty, getting back to some of these questions. I prefer D&D anywhere. What part of D&D do you dislike the most or think needs improvement? So first and foremost, the thing I dislike about D&D the most is players. Because while players may be the best part of the game, they are, in fact, the worst part of the game. I personally have DM'd now for hundreds of different people. And while I'd love to say each one of those hundreds of people have been outstanding citizens and fantastic players and just genuinely swell people, Unfortunately, I'm here to report to you that not every single one of them has been swell and kind and fun. Unfortunately, I've had some not so great people at my tables, and that really sucks. And let me tell you what, if you've got a group of 5, you can have 4 people at the table that are fantastic. But if you've got one bad person, then you've got yourself a bad game. It's funny how that works. So, in regards of that, you know, the whole aspect of tabletop role-playing games, players are the worst. But what part of D&D specifically, and I'm going to just assume here about 5e, I dislike the most? What I dislike the most is character builds and combat. Now, why do I dislike builds? I dislike builds because people spend more time thinking about their character in regards of trying to make them fit a specific role versus being a player at the table. And 2, I dislike builds because builds basically are boring. You know, oh, look, another Hexblade Warlock that can do all the damage. Oh, hey, look, it's that person that can, you know, cast, you know, enlarge on themselves, and then they can cast another enlarge, but it's not enlarged, so they can go an extra size. Oh boy, you know, like that gets real old real quick. And it doesn't add anything to the game. It doesn't add anything to storytelling. All it adds is the fact that you either, you know, power gamed or you just looked up some guide online. That's all it really tells me. So yeah, what I'll say is builds and combat time. And 2, the reason why I don't like combat time is because combat takes way too long. And if combat takes time, that means you're spending less time on the other pillars of the game. And I care more about exploration and social interaction than I do care about combat. Specifically if, like, in a 4-hour game, if combat is 2 hours of it, that's always miserable for me. Is the best magic item I've ever given your players a rock of gravity detection? So, for those of you not in on the joke here, the rock of gravity detection is always a gag joke I always give to all my groups. I always give them this magical item and I say, oh, it's magical, but you don't know what it is. And like, basically, eventually at some point they either cast Identify on it or they get someone else to cast Identify or whatever. And they get told that it's a rock of gravity detection. Now, obviously, that is just a great meme right there. But the real thing I have about the rock of gravity detection is it not only does it work, you know, you drop in, of course, you know, you can detect its gravity, but it genuinely does glow if it's 1 foot away from 0 gravity, which has next to no applications, but there is the potential for it, you know, to be useful. You know, if you threw that down the hall and then you see that it glows, like, that could prove useful, right? If you see that there's no gravity. You know, that could let you be warned ahead of time, right? So there is that. But the best magic item I've ever given my players probably was... man, that's a tough one. I've given out some crazy items. I've given out the Deck of Many Things. I've given out... in fact, actually, Pone, you drew from the Deck of Many Things. But it didn't work out well for you, I recall. I've given out Vorpal Swords. I've given out, you know, like... I've given out some crazy things. I gave out, just recently in my game, I gave out a, not the Book of Vile Darkness, but the Amulet of True Evil, which lets you, like, smite an evil or good character if they don't make a DC 20, like, dex save or something like that. So I've given out some pretty crazy items. No, but it's pretty close. Oh man, I gotta catch up on chat. The Neverwinter, Eternal Summer. Oh, I dig that. Keep the mystery, and they discover in the game. Off-topic question: favorite dog breed? You look like a dog person. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'll be getting to that momentarily. I'll ask about cocaine. Cocaine. How much do you rely on Theater of the Mind versus maps and tabletop? The damage that monster has no dog or ever has. True. That is a fun fact. I've never had a dog. Players, solid DM answer. Mine is lawful stupid paladin player specifically. What, no dog? Is he a cat person? lost my soul. A little jumping ahead there, but I'll be getting into that. Is I've never had a pet ever, which is pretty unfortunate. They've done adventure books for the sort of list of sort of locations, but not Neverwinter. Pitch us a Neverwinter book with a cool tagline. So I think that they've already done the city campaign with Waterdeep Dragon Heist. They've already done the Going to Hell adventure, Baldur's Gate Descend to Avernus. So I think that Neverwinter could go down the line of Neverwinter. Oh my gosh, I was blanking on the name. I had it in the tip of my tongue. Oh my gosh. Neverwinter Celestial Stride. And my idea for the Neverwinter Celestial Stride adventure would be that there is basically you start off in Neverwinter, some things go down, and basically you get yourself embroiled in dealings with angels, and you basically have to deal with that. And that would be a great way to incorporate a whole bunch of new Celestials, because Celestials are in fact the least taglined monster in all of 5e so far. There's only 9 Celestial monsters or something like that, so they could add a ton more. But you could definitely, with dealing with Celestials, they could really dive back into the idea of alignment, because alignment is something that has gone away in 5e. Alignment's really only ever appeared in like 3 of the adventure modules, in regards of the magical items you can get or whatever. So I definitely think you could really dive into alignment with that, I think that Celestials, it can be really scary, and I think putting the fear into your players with angels is a great way to go. I'm lucky in that. I didn't write my answer down. Neverwinter Celestial Strife. I'm lucky that my setting, Caliport hasn't been used for ages. What are your thoughts on the Hattori? Here are my thoughts. I've got no idea. Unfortunately, while I've played all but 4th edition, I actually don't know too much in regards to the lore. I'm really bad in regards to that. I know all the other D&D YouTubers are all about the lore and stuff, but I am not that well versed in the lore. So I've got no thoughts. I don't know. So sadly, I don't know anything about the Hattori at all whatsoever. Sorry to say, sorry for that. That's sorry to hear. I know bad rolls, dice rolls are supposed to be the part of the game, but what are some tricks for a DM to raise the spirits without blatantly changing a roll in their favor? Here's what I would do. I would make a very important distinction between winning because you rolled well and winning because you're a good player. Now, there are circumstances where you roll bad, you get the hot streak of just rolling nothing but 1s and 2s, and you can't accomplish anything in that regard. But I think that what you really need to do here is you need to present scenarios and situations where they don't need to roll dice, but even though they're not rolling dice, they're still getting things accomplished. Such as that could be them interacting with a person. That could be them solving a trap or a puzzle. That could be them almost getting into a combat because they intimidate them or whatever, they instead ignore the fight, or they make the enemy run away. Present a scenario that the player, not the character, but specifically the player, overcomes through their wit and guile and talent, not a scenario of, oh, this can only be decided by dice. And because at the end of the day, if you present only scenarios that can only be overcome by dice, inevitably they're going to fail, right? At some point, they're always going to fail if it's always coming down to dice. So that's my solution is present scenario for player, not character, to overcome without the need of dice. That's my solution. Off type of question. Favorite dog breed? You look like a dog person. Yeah, so, never had a dog. So, the unfortunate truth of the matter is I've never had a dog or a cat because my mom is allergic to fun, and just growing up, I never had a dog or a cat or anything. I had a fish, but I do not consider fish as pets because you cannot pet them. I only constitute something as a pet if you can actively pet it. So that's my logic, reason, and thinking there. Is I've never had a dog, so I can't tell you what my favorite dog breed is. I could not tell you. I don't. Whenever I see a dog breed, I don't know what the heck their names are. I've never been like I know what a German Shepherd looks like, right? But I sadly haven't interacted with too many dogs in my time. It's been a real terrible life, not having dogs. How much do you rely on theater of the mind versus maps and tabletop? So, me personally, I would love to run games 100% theater of the mind and allow my players to construct their own maps. However, I am DMing for some people who say, screw that, we want maps, we want pretty maps. So lately I've been having to drop a bunch of maps and find a bunch of maps from everywhere to do that. It comes down to also the game system. 5e wants to be played on a map. It really, really does because of the environment, specifically because of like the ranges on skills and stuff like that. 5e really, really wants to be played on a map, and even more so, it really wants to play on a grid as well. But when I run a whole bunch of OSR content, a lot of it doesn't care about being on a map. So I run plenty of OSR content without with that. So I would say it depends entirely on my players. You can pet a fish, just your hand will get wet. All right, new constitution here. Not only does a pet have to be something you can pet, but it has to actually be reciprocal of it. Give me that map. What is the best rodent to eat? Oh, okay. What is the best rodent to eat? Alrighty, how much do you, just answer that. What was your fish's pet name? That I cannot remember. I had this thing before I really, gained consciousness as a human being. I must have been, really, really young. It was one of two. It was either orange or gold. It was one of those two. I'd have to ask my parents what the name of my pet fish was. Or not pet fish, it was just the name of my fish. So yeah, it was one of those two. It was either orange or gold. Clearly they let me. I remember they let me name it, but it was obviously a terrible name. So no cats then? Sadly no. Sadly no cats, no dogs, no fun pets ever. I'm going to draw maps, but the fog will return as they pass through. Their fault if they don't map. Yeah, I think that, dungeon mapping is a lost art that needs to make a return because, if you give your players a perfect description of a room and they map it out, but they map it out incorrectly, and then you basically as they, move through the dungeon again, I love that thing of this doesn't line up right. It's well, is it because you messed up, or is it because there's a secret door there, or is it because, something came up, what is it, right? Guinea pigs are supposedly tasty. My favorite dragon type? Blue. Why is blue my favorite dragon type? 1, because I love deserts. 2, I like their aesthetics. 3, I like lightning. 4, because I think that blue fits a really great description of a dragon not being bestial, but not being a hyper intelligent to the point where it's It doesn't even matter that it's like a dragon, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't like white dragons because white dragons are boring in that they're bestial, and then I don't like the other spectrum of the dragon just being the maliciously super duper smart, creature. I love blue. I like blue so much because it feels like the most dragony of all the dragons to me. I know the red dragon is synonymous with D&D as a whole, and it's regarded in the highest of regards by D&D, but I think blue is just so great. Once again, I love the aesthetics. I love lightning. I think lightning is malicious. Fire is something that the players often control because they themselves get fireball and they get fire resistant things or whatever. But lightning is just chaotic, and I love it. Can you tell us a story about the Brazier Room in Curse of Strahd that you DM'd? Sadly, no. I've, at this point, ran Curse of Strahd like 4 times, and not a single one of those groups has ever Brazier Roomed. Not a one. Not once. And mind you, one time I was a player, and we didn't Brazier Room. So I couldn't tell you, sadly. It's honestly been unfortunate. Like, my group is just my groups have never done it. What's the best rodent to eat? Heck if I know. Typically the dead kind. I wouldn't want to eat a live rodent. That's for sure. I wouldn't be opposed to eating a rat if I was like starving. Like, I'm not against it. I've never been so deprived of nutrition that I need to eat a rat, thankfully. My favorite type is a pocket dragon, just a Weedle dragon guarding its Weedle shiny hoard. See, that's cute. That's cute right there. My party just agreed to help some ghosts they found in the desert deliver the cargo in their caravan. The ghosts died of thirst and want to drink the party's water. They had to watch as precious water went on the dirt in Casper style. Was that too mean? Also, they are a bickering couple. Are they a bickering couple in game, in real life, or both? No, I think that's great, honestly. I think that's absolutely fantastic. I think, that's definitely, like, a great thing of, like, oh, hey, we need to make sure our water's, like, being taken care of, and it's gone. I think that's absolutely hilarious. What Brazier Room? So basically, without going into major spoilers here into Curse of Strahd for anybody here that hasn't played through it or plans to play through it, basically there is a room, and it has, it's got a brazier in it. I'll tell you that. But basically, it's a very, very important, powerful room that is completely optional, but incredibly, potentially hyper-lethal. And it's funny, I studied the thing multiple times because I, made the Curse of Strahd guide series on it. I've ran Curse of Strahd now, like, multiple times, and I played through it. But it just never came up. Castle Ravenloft is just too big. It's too big. It's pure chaos and people get teleported off to separate places. Absolutely. The dungeon level, yeah. So, Pone, yeah, your group, you know what's funny, Pone? Your group actually was in that room, but you didn't touch anything. You were just like, Pone, your group actually went into that room, and you guys were like, yeah, let's not touch anything, and kind of just, like, backed off. Which, to be fair, was probably a good thing because I seem to recall, like, I was pretty prepared to TPK you all. I was not going to shy away from potential TPK if you had messed things up there, which you certainly could have. It's it's funny because worst official module you played. Ooh, okay, I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, basically, I ran Curse of Strahd. Not only did I run Curse of Strahd, But I also have ran good old-fashioned I6 Ravenloft. And in I6 Ravenloft, Castle Ravenloft is even deadlier. Like, if you read 5e Castle Ravenloft, it's got some scary things to it. Especially because if you, like, are 10th level, 10th level is pretty powerful, but even still, like, you've got plenty of resources and plenty of tools. But I6 Ravenloft, using AD&D rules, Castle Ravenloft is disgustingly scary. You've got level drain. You've got instant kill mechanics. You have charms that like last forever. You have traps that just eat away at your health, and it is just monstrous. Monstrous. I6 Ravenloft is no joke, and that the Brazier Room in I6 Ravenloft is even scarier than 5e's. Even scarier. I6 Ravenloft, the Brazier Room, easy TPK. Easy. In regards of the worst official module I have played, I'm going to assume you meant 5e, but even not. Even if it wasn't, I'd still have to give it to 5e. For 5e, oh man, the worst official module, I'd say Horde of the Dragon Queen was probably the worst one, in all honesty. I've dabbled in all of the 5e modules at this point, but man, Horde of the Dragon Queen was just boring. It's purely as written, it's just not a thriller. It doesn't lead to the spark of imagination and joy that D&D should have. Like, Horde of the Dragon Queen is like... You know what Horde of the Dragon Queen is? Horde of the Dragon Queen is like... Imagine if, like you had to ask, like, a 10-year-old what they thought D&D was. But not like not like a, like, nerdy 10-year-old. I'm talking about, like, a 10-year-old that, like, studies all the time and doesn't do anything nerdy. And then you ask them, oh, hey, what's Dungeons & Dragons? And they're like, oh, you go on a quest and, you fight cultists and then you fight a dragon. Like, and then you're like, yeah, that's Horde of the Dragon Queen right there. I didn't like Mad Mage. Here's the thing I like about Mad Mage is what I like about Mad Mage is there are certain levels that are fantastic, and even to go further, there are specifically certain scenarios that are fantastic. I do not think it's a good product overall, though. I personally would never run a group purely through that dungeon, having them go from level to level, layer to layer, over and over and over and over and over and over again. I would never do that, especially with 5e, because the combat takes forever, right? Like, I think Mad Mage has some fantastic pieces to it. It's got some fantastic little settings here and there. It's got some fantastic encounters here and there. But as a full-blown product, I do not think it is a good product, It's funny, like, I feel like Mad Mage honestly should have been almost like, like a Candlekeep product where it was just a collection of like 23 different adventures or whatever. Because like Dungeon the Mad Mage, like there is some connectivity between the levels, but like there doesn't need to be, right? Like if I could go, oh goodness, I could go back in there and change it up real quick to be like 23 separate adventures. It would not be that too much of a stretch. Oh, should we slice it up and just interspace levels amongst the adventures? Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. I think, yeah, Horde of the Dragon Queen. I think that, Dungeon Mad Mage, it works well, not as a full-blown product, but as a little chunks and pieces thing. I think that, it certainly just, 5e just wasn't made for mega dungeon crawls. It just wasn't. What's a good level to have the players explore the castle, the dinner invitation, or similar scenario? I say any level. I personally say level 3. So I made a video about this. I believe the video is called, oh my gosh, I don't even remember what the video is called, but I made a video all about like dinner at Castle Ravenloft. And I personally am an advocate for inviting the players to Castle Ravenloft at level 3. Because what that does is, if your players know that they're playing Curse of Strahd, your players know that they're going to the dude's castle, they know that it's scary. And the best part is once they get to high levels, then they're like, oh, we're not scared. We've got all these things. I've got Fireball. I've got, 7 Rages or whatever, right? But when they're level 3, they don't have anything. And they're scared. And that's the best. When they're scared, they don't know what the heck they're going to do. And as they explore around Castle Ravenloft, they're going to get scared if, a bat pops out, right? Like, that's great. Get them exploring Castle Ravenloft early and often. And get them just involved in the idea that the enemy is so powerful, they're willing to invite them over for dinner, let them explore around the castle, and not even care because, Strahd knows that the party is that weak. That's great storytelling right there. Oh, yeah, explore around my castle. What are you going to do about it? Right? Like, that's so great. I absolutely love it. So I say level 3. As soon as level 2 to 3. I think this dials back to a conversation as well that I totally need to make a video on. But one thing I hate is the idea that 5e is actually multiple game systems in one. And what do I mean by that? Levels 1 through 4 are a different game to levels 5 through 10. They just are. Like levels 1 through 4, you're playing under certain tones, themes, and settings. But then levels 5 through 10, you're playing under entirely different conceptions. You're playing an entirely different genre. You're playing entirely different just everything. And one thing I don't like about all these adventure modules is that we're basically forced to have this different tonality. I think Curse of Strahd's a perfect example. Like in Curse of Strahd, when the players are level 4, they're nobodies. And then once they hit level 5, they can tackle everything. And it's just that's such a weird transition. I really don't like 5e's transition from that tier of play. I think it's a little bit way too steep. The difference between a level 3 and 4 character is pretty big. It's a pretty big power spike because you either get the ability score improvement or you get the feat. But the difference between a level 4 and a level 5 is just massive. It's huge, and I just don't like it. What would you do if the party turned down the invite as the group I'm a player in has? I think it's bugging the DM. We are exploring side quest. I mean, me personally, being a totally vindictive DM, if I sent them an invite to Castle Ravenloft and they did not accept the invitation, then what's going to happen is the next time they get an invitation, it's coming with a bloody finger of one of the party's friends. And basically it's okay, you didn't accept my invite? All right, I'll invite you tomorrow. And all of a sudden it's oh, hey, that person from the first town? Yeah, here's their finger. Show up for dinner. And I think right there, that's just a great piece of storytelling because not only do the party have to think, oh man, this guy's totally evil, but 2, that gets them thinking about the world. Do they care about the NPCs? Do the people in the world realize that if they get themselves associated with these players or the characters that they themselves are in danger? How does the player react? Are they going to try and save their friend? Is their friend actually in danger at all? Was that their real finger or was that just an illusion? There's a lot of ways you can spin that, and more importantly, how your players are going to approach that. So, bloody finger of a friend as part of next invitation. And thankfully, for all the groups that I've ran, not a single one of them has ever turned down, which is really funny. I keep running different. I've ran different people, and they just don't. Like, sometimes they act similar. It's really weird. So I haven't had to deal with that. Every time I invite my players to Castle Ravenloft, they understand that they need to show up, which is pretty cool. It's funny you mention level 3. My players have been stuck there quite a while in Waterdeep Dragon Heist because I've been using supplemental material from the DM's Guild, including Blue Alley. Cool stuff. I dig Blue Alley. I started messing with them as well. Started having horrific nightmares. Yeah, I think that's a great way to go. Is like, you know, hey, the bad guy is telling you to do something. Yeah, you can choose not to do it, but the bad guy is going to act like a bad guy because that's what bad guys do. That's another topic I want to discuss is the bad guy's there to win. No bad guy ever shows up to an adventure to lose. But at the same time, we as players show up to the table to win, right? And that's a really, really tough thing that you want to run a game where the bad guy wants to win and the players are showing up because they want to win. But the two eventually clash. And what ends up happening most of the time is that the bad guy loses. But I'm here to tell you, the more times your players show up to the table and they win because that's what players do, they win, and bad guys are just there to lose, the more that happens, the less impactful it is when the bad guys lose. Because there might come some point where your players are like, hey, you know, we won because we're destined to win. And that sucks. I've played at tables where the bad guy loses because the bad guy has to lose or because the DM makes them lose. And I hate that. I hate when bad guys are ran in a way that just doesn't feel bad guy-y, you know? I hate that. I'm there to, you know, I'm there to be the referee, right? I'm not trying to be vindictive and kill you all. I'm not trying to say that you lose, I win. Like, I don't want to be the vindictive DM here. I want to be the referee. I want to set up a clear bad guy that is clearly trying to win and do anything and everything in their power to win. But more importantly, I want to see the players overcome that with me acting as a referee and not a player versus DM mentality. I want just the players versus the bad guy mentality. I want that. Everyone refers to him as the devil, so we have just been like sounds. They sound like a bad idea. Plus, something is up with the vineyard or missing Saint's bones. Yeah, I think that happens a lot too. I've definitely heard that a lot from other groups. Other groups are like, man, we don't want to go there. That sounds dangerous. But that's another topic I want to discuss is one of the major reasons I play the game is because I too like to live dangerously. Like, you know, the average person in the D&D world is not an adventurer because being an adventurer is scary, right? Like, going off to fight goblins is incredibly lethal and scary. But that's why we do it. Because we don't want to play like the average nobodies. We want to play like people that are willing to stand up and be adventurous. Never make Harry Potter players, or never make a Harry Potter character that's reluctant to do things. Make characters that are adventurous. Make adventurers that want to adventure. Don't make people that just show up because it's D&D night. Don't make characters that, you know, try to skirt around everything because skirting around everything just gets real quick. Justice for Alina, big bad evil guy winning. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Kermit the Frog here. Kermit the Frog. Oh man, oh me, oh my. Goodness gracious, what a wonderful life. Trying to advertise myself here, showing off all the fun things that I'm working on. I'm working on my newest volume, Volume 5, Islands of my D&D magazine. I'm working on a reverse hex crawl mega dungeon. I'm working on small random hex crawls. I'm working on a book of layers and dungeons. And I'm working on a whole bunch of other fun things too. And my overall goal and plan is I'm going to be releasing, like, I'm probably going to have a website and probably be selling stuff on the DMs Guild, or not DMs Guild, but the Drive Through RPG. And I want to have a bunch of things up for people to grab, and I want to do all that fun jazz. Because currently right now, I'm just me. Like some of your favorite big D&D YouTubers, those people have full-blown groups. Like, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Oh my gosh. There's too many D&D YouTubers trying to get them all together. The DM Layer, that dude puts out Adventure magazine, but he's got a team of like 8 or 10 or something crazy like that. Like, I've got nobody. So I eventually want to work up to getting a team. I think that'd be great. Well, we did take on the Hags in the Windmill because we lawful good, missing kids, nearly TBK. Heck yeah. Yeah, Lightning Bolt sucks. Yeah. Lightning Bolt is just, like, Fireball is just an OP spell. Like, it is completely overpowered for the level slot that it is. It's overpowered for its usability, its capability, for its functionality. And I remember seeing, like, people on Twitter getting upset that Fireball is overpowered. They're like, oh, well, it's not overpowered. The DM's just not coming up with creative, scenarios for it, or for it to not be overpowered. But the issue is if you basically present scenarios continuously where an overpowered spell is no longer overpowered, then it one, it feels adversarial, but two, it just burns your creative juices. Like, you can only so many times can you fight in a scenario where you're surrounded on all sides and a fireball would be dangerous. There's only so many times where you can be like, oh, you're in a wooden structure and there's gas in the air, and if you cast fireball, everyone blows up. You can only do that so many times, right? One problem I keep having is that my players always want cash from missions. They don't seem to want to be just the hero. I think it's perfectly fine. Like, just run a game where they're not the heroes. Like, you can... An important distinction you need to have right from the get-go of running an adventure is, are you playing as adventurers? Are you playing as heroes? What are you? Because if you write up a random adventure, or you're running an adventure, and players just show up to the table, they're going to show up with different expectations. And more so, not just the whole group as a whole, but individuals. Because some might say, oh, we need to be the heroes, but others might say, oh, I just want, the money. And you need to cater to whatever it is that they want. So if they want to be just money-grubbing adventurers, then let them, right? I think that some of the greatest adventures ever spawned were from adventurers that became reluctant heroes versus heroes that are, from the get-go, heroes that, do heroic things, right? Well, I'm running Wild Beyond the Witchlight. How do I balance those who want to fight versus how the game is written with arguably less combat? Ooh, interesting. Luke, DM's Lair? Yes, Luke from DM's Lair. He's putting out the magazine. And I believe he said that, like, he doesn't even, like, write for it anymore because he's got that many people on it or something like that. Like, that dude's got a ton of people. And there's a bunch of other YouTubers, in like Matt Colville, for example, who's got a D&D magazine, right? So I'm running Wild Beyond the Witchlight. How I balance those who want to fight versus how the game is written with arguably less combat. So what I would strongly suggest here is I would have an out of game discussion about what combat means. Like, do the people that want combat, are they the type of group that just want to fight 2d6 orcs, move to the next room, fight 2d6 more orcs? Are they that kind of group? Or do they want combat that is much more narrative focused and much more, influencing and telling of the world and telling of the structures and of the world that they're in? Because you can easily have both, right? Or you can easily do both, but, the people that don't want combat aren't going to like just fighting 2d6 random orcs, right? Like, they want something tied to it. So for the people that don't want combat, they probably, would prefer, of course, between having, nitty gritty combat or having narrative combat. They would want narrative combat. So what I would suggest is you present scenarios where the narrative of the combat makes sense. Don't have any random encounters at all whatsoever. That is just fighting 2d6 orcs. Instead, have combat be meaningful. Combat is something where people are learning revelations about themselves, about the monster that they're fighting, about the friends that they're trying to protect. Have there be not just, there's a bad guy with HP, destroy the monster. It also needs to be a thing of, okay, there's monsters over here fighting, but at the same time, this windmill is catching fire, and some of the PCs need to go put out the fire at the windmill, or get the kids out of the burning building, or, basically you need to present combat that isn't just combat. And that's what I say. That's what I'll say. Present combat that is more than just beat 'em up combat. So, yeah, so going on with that, there's the example of, hey, half the party needs to fight and the other half needs to save people. You can run with that all the time, right? You can always have it be like, okay, there's these monsters, but at the same time, there is the cat stuck in the tree and you need to climb up the tree. There is, someone's drowning, so someone needs to go, dive underwater. Oh, someone is, stuck in the Laffy Taffy, quicksand and needs to be pulled out, right? You can have so many different scenarios where even during combat, they're using their actions for things that are not just, reducing something down to 0 HP. That's what I'll say. So one of my PCs blew up most of my mercenaries yesterday. I knew I shouldn't have given him a ring with 2 fireballs in. To be honest, it's first standout moment of the campaign, so not really mad. Always understand that if you give your players anything, they will always find a way to use it to the best and or worst of their capabilities. That fireball could have easily been something that toasts the party themselves. I know you're in here, Dracula, you big nerd. Where's my gosh darn money? Exactly, right? Gotta run. Thanks for the stream, Knight. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you. That's a cool way of framing it. Thanks, man. I'll play around with that. No problem. I had mine scared of a cloud because 2 sessions ago, an ancient blue dragon harassed them, had to supplicate themselves to its awesomeness. I started with its shadow passing over them. Heck yeah. Could you imagine you're just flying around, you're just walking around, and all of a sudden a big shadow appears, and you're like, oh, it's a cloud. No, it's a dragon. That'd be terrifying. I did the same opening yesterday, but it was a big cloud. The panic was fun. Yeah, I think, having the villain's grandiose, introduction is always a fantastic way to brim up fear. The first time they meet the vampire lord, it doesn't have to just be out in the middle of, the night and be like, oh, I'm right here. No, make it entertaining. Make it flashy. Make it memorable. Gotta go. I think Dracula left. Running the Wild Bound the Witchlight 2 how's the best to fill up the world with whimsy and not making it drag? What I would say is the best way to add whimsy to the fantastical world of a Fey wild adventure is to not dwell on things. Quickly describe something nonsensical and then just move on like it's normal. But, leave there that mystery. So, like, a perfect example is they're walking around, and then all of a sudden, you're like, okay, as you're walking around, you see that the horizon inverts, and a purple sun comes out, and the purple sun shines a light on a flower, and the flower blooms brightly, and then explodes. And then you continue on walking. You can just fill the world with all these random descriptions really quickly and then just move on with it and just don't elaborate on anything. And you don't need to make things drag. You don't need to have it be this grandiose thing of, oh yeah, as you make your way across the river, there you see the fantastical sight of the fairies dancing and the satyrs chirping and you don't need to go into that paragraph long description of something. You can just easily be like, okay, as you're walking around, there you see a satyr, climb up the tree, and his harp falls to the ground. But when the harp falls to the ground, all of a sudden it transforms into a lizard and scurries off. Bam. Just like that. Just keep things quick. Keep it casual. Keep it guessing, right? Keep them guessing, because when you add those weird descriptions in, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, I wonder what's gonna happen next to us. I would take inspiration from things like The Wizard of Oz. Absolutely. Keep things brief, but make them unique. Yeah, so Wizard of Oz is definitely a book series I really want to read. I recently found a YouTuber who basically covers several of the Wizard of Oz books. And let me tell you, the movies have not gone anywhere close to the creepy, strange, macabre nature that is Oz. Oz is like terrifying when you read this, but at the same time, it's not only is it terrifying, but it's like surreal. And I really like, now that I found that YouTube thing, I really want to read more, or I want to read it, because the world just seems strange, and it'd be a great inspiration to learn about, how to make a weird world. I keep ending up seeing Barney's song, LOL toddler racing flashbacks. I love you, you love me. Have you ever played or DM'd Keep on the Borderlands, either the old school version or 5e remake? So sadly, I have not touched Keep on the Borderlands. I was planning on running it in OSR though. Nope. Was planning on running it in OSR. Keep on the Borderlands is like one of the most like quintessential things for like D&D nerds, back in the 70s and 80s. Like that was the introduction to D&D. Like for 5e, that has been like mostly that's been either Curse of Strahd or what do you call that thing? Oh my gosh, Phandalin. And I really, really want to run Keep on the Borderlands, because I've read through it. Like I read through it all, and I was planning on running it sometime in the future for some OSR nerds. And the thing I love about it is it truly encompasses what the OSR actually meant, and specifically like old school D&D meant, in that it presented a unique place, and it wasn't about heroes being heroes. It was about adventurers being adventurous, and I loved it. Like it presented a fantastic, setting of this fort and a surrounding little environment and these cave systems filled with all sorts of nonsense in them, and that's great. Like that's just fantastic. Like giving players agency in their adventures is something that unfortunately 5e has veered away from. 5e is very much so in the camp of making adventures where the players have little to no agency. But, Keep on the Borderlands, that is just classic little hex crawling and dungeon crawling. And I love it. I want more of it. But I don't want to run it in 5e because I genuinely think that 5e just isn't meant for hex crawling and dungeon delving. I think it's made for something else. I'm adding some fun desert encounters that are meta references, i.e. you see a beggar on a princess flying away in the magic carpet. Also, there's a chance they find a body on an archaeologist with a hat and a bullwhip dead of a snake bite. That's pretty great. Keep on the Borderlands is a massive meat grinder. It's great. Yeah, that's the thing too, is something I really want to, like, I'm going to be making some OSR videos soon, and something I really want to dispel is the notion that, like, like old school is meat grinder. It wasn't. Like, yeah, I mean, PCs died a little bit easier, and maybe your retainers died, right? But like, some people get the idea that like you're just showing up to the table with like 3 different character sheets that get like ripped up by the end of the session, and that unfortunately steers a lot of people away. Like I've tried in court like getting some people to play OSR, and then they tell me, oh, it's way too easy to die, or oh, it's not about the character. But I basically have to go through this like long process of reaffirming them that like OSR is even more so about the character than 5e is, or not just 5e, but also modern games like Pathfinder and whatever else, right? Like OSR, it cares so much about the characters that it doesn't leave things up to the game. It leaves things up to your agency. The perfect description I made last stream was, if I went to someone's random 5th level character sheet, 5th level fighter, I would know 95% of what's on their character sheet. I would just natively know. Like, okay, I know that you've got these features. I know you got these abilities. I know for a fact, even though I've never seen you play, never done anything, I just show up to a random table. I pick up your character sheet. I'm going to know what's 95% what's on the character sheet. But that's not the case with OSR. The fighter has no abilities at all whatsoever in old school D&D. And the best part about that was the abilities that you have on your character are something you earned over the course of your adventure, right? You picked up that sword that has cure wounds, daily. You went out of your way to get that cursed ring that gives you the ability to summon a devil, a type 1 through 3 devil or whatever, right? Like, that is cool. That gives way more player agency than builds and a linear character progression than anything. Keeping the Borderlands and Isle of Dread iconic sandboxy games. Isle of Dread I have ran. Isle of Dread I absolutely love. And that's why I love Tomb of Annihilation, because Tomb of Annihilation is essentially like 5e's answer to Isle of Dread. I'm hoping to run a casual pickup game of Keep on the Borderlands sometime soon. I'll be using Lamentations of the Flame Princess for gameplay, though. Interesting. I dig it. So Lamentations of the Flame Princess isn't something I've covered on my channel yet. I do want to cover it on my channel. But something I really like about Lamentations is of the guns. I do like the gun rulings in Lamentations. But Lamentations is, definitely got that unique vibe that a lot of other games just cannot do. The main issue with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, though, is that a lot of the content produced for it is just really, like, you cannot cover it on YouTube because of how X-rated it is and because of how edgy it is and just, like, how non-consumer friendly some of the products are. Which, obviously, like, it's got its core niche audience that loves that, X-rated stuff, but I couldn't cover it on my channel if I wanted to. Some of the things I don't, I don't know if I could really condone, cover it, just looking at this stuff, but Lamentations is just natively a good system, and there is some really great adventures made for it as well. You could always run away or not rush into combat. Exactly, right? Like, OSR very much so encompasses the idea that fighting is like the dumbest thing you can do. You only ever fight if you are guaranteed a win or you're just stupid. And I like that approach. Especially if you're running a gold for XP system, which I always recommend most OSR systems do. When you're running a gold for XP system, there's gold in the room. There's 10,000 gold sitting in the room. It's guarded by orcs. How do you get the gold? Well, instead of just, the 5e answer would be I rush in and fight the orcs. But, but in old school, that could lead to people dying. And you don't want that, right? So how do you get the gold? Does the rogue sneak in there to steal the gold? Do you cause a distraction? Do you get some of the other monsters in the dungeon to fight the orcs? Do you lure the orcs into a trap? you start thinking about the game in a much different light when it's not just, oh, this is a game about combat, let's do combat. When you think about the game in regards of wanting to accomplish a goal that is like avoid combat at all costs, how do you do that? And I love that. OSR, we sound like it's about liking our characters dying. That's not it. It's a game with consequences for your actions. Exactly. Exactly. That's something that, unfortunately, like a lot of people don't like. People don't, there's a lot of modern gamers who do not like that approach. There's a lot of modern gamers that want to show up and win because they showed up, and thus they should win. Or at least that's their mentality on it. And I don't think that should be true. I think that you get a lot of not only just general enjoyment, but actually mentally rewarded for accomplishing a goal. As mentioned before with the orcs and the gold. Like, if I just go in there and I kill the orcs, yeah, that's cool and all. But if I devise a really cool plan where I set up a tripwire outside the room and then we lure in the ghost from, 5 rooms over to, fight the orc. And then once all the orcs are battling the ghost, then, we close the door behind them. Like, if we come up with that strategy and we get to pull off, that is so much more rewarding than just killing them, right? Like, that's great. That's what I'm doing in 5e. One of my players is a book nerd, so made a random book table for when he finds them or buys them. In some are hints of locations of artifacts lost. Cool. Another has criminal background, so is contact. Sometimes he's rumors of big scores. Heck yeah. Oh, that's a question. XP leveling or milestone? Okay, so here's what I think, right? In old school, specifically, like, let's look at AD&D or, whatever, right? The reason why XP was necessary was because classes leveled up at different rates. You had the halfling leveled up differently than the thief, then leveled up differently than the fighter, then the cleric, then the wizard, then the elf, They all leveled at different rates, and thus XP was required, right? Unless you were doing a milestone system where you basically got like chunks of like 500 like XP at a time or whatever, I guess. Like, you could do that, but but XP made sense because, they leveled up differently. Nowadays, in modern games, in most modern games that I look at, that is not the case. In most modern games, everyone levels up at the same time. Now, that can be done differently, of course. Like, if you're willing to, air quote, bend the rules or break the rules or whatever, and give out XP for different people for different things, then, yeah, then people do still level up differently, even though the XP threshold is the same. But, as far as I'm concerned, looking through all of the 5e books, I haven't seen any notion of ever giving XP to only, like, individual party members, not, like, as the whole team. Like, I've never seen that. I've only ever seen instances of the party gets XP, and thus it's shared evenly. So what I'll say is Milestone is the best way to go about it for, 5e, because of the way 5e is meant to be ran. And XP is great for OSR because of the way it's meant to be ran. And I like I've mentioned before, I've ran for hundreds of different people. I've ran, at this point, dozens of different campaigns. And overall, my feelings about 5e is that 5e is very much so a game that is about the adventure. It is not a game about the characters. And when it is a game about the adventure, you are going on adventures, doing adventurous things because you are adventuring, and the game is about being an adventurer. I think instead of doing all the number crunching and doing all the sparsing out how many encounters you can get into, instead of rewarding people bonus XP for doing the thing that they were going to do anyway, I think that 5e just works better for Milestone. And then consequently for old school play, I think XP works incredibly well because of the way it rewards you of getting the gold. Or, you look at some of the other games like Astonishing Swordsman and Sources of Hyperborea. that actively tells you get XP for showing up to the game. You get XP for doing something creative with your character class. You get XP for doing whatever. Another game system I looked at was Mothership. Mothership is a game where you get XP for doing what your class is supposed to do. You get XP for doing something that your character is supposed to do, and things of that nature. And like, that's great. Like, so my answer to that is entirely depends on the system. The younglings mentality makes me sad sometimes. That's why I make them roll wisdom so they have solve out of box sometimes. That's why I miss playing old school. Yeah. I've only done milestone leveling in 5e. XP, especially if based on old on the edition's janky CR system, feels just weird. So I have ran 5e using XP, and I'm here to tell you that it was not fun. And in fact, the CR system is completely broken and ruins the XP. So the reason why that is, I used the XP several times, but the major noticeable one I used it in was I was running West March's game. And in this West Marches game, you know, there was like 30 people in it, and they dropped in and out of sessions. And because they dropped in and out of sessions, they leveled up differently. Because, you know, if someone showed up for 10 sessions, they would inevitably be higher than the person that only showed up for 2, unless that person, you know, died all the time and then their XP got reset or whatever. Which we had some players that like their characters would only last like 1 or 2 sessions all the time. It was pretty funny. But yeah, so basically because of that, there was people with different levels. And at one point, like this was like one of the defining encounters of the entire campaign. The party of 8 players goes up against 4 T-Rexes. And I was thinking to myself, man, 4 T-Rexes against this party, and the party, mind you, consisted of people between levels 3 to 5. I was thinking to myself, man, like this could be easily a TPK. This could be easily some party members dead. Maybe they try and run away. What are they going to do about this? They decided to fight it out. And not only did they fight it out, not a single PC died. Only one PC went down, in fact. Only one. And what ended up happening was, when I do the CR calculator, okay, 8 PCs going up against 4 T-Rexes. At the same time, you get this much XP. They got so much XP, everybody would have gotten enough XP to level up twice. And then I was just thinking to myself, like, that was definitely like one of the defining moments where I was like, man, I hate this XP and CR system. I hate it. Because, like, it just felt so janky that not a single person died. Not even, like, one person, air quote, came close, but, like, not relatively. Like, they could have been way closer to death than normal, but, like, they get into a fight, you know, no one dies. They didn't lose, like, that many resources, really. And then, like, they all level up twice because of that? Like, that's just, like, dumb. And mind you, like, that's including, like, level 6 people. I think one of the level 6 people, like, had, like, so little XP that they would only level up once. But, like the levels 3 through 5 people, for sure, they would all level up twice. And that just, like, that felt so dumb to me. And, you know, if I run a 5e Hex Crawl, if I run a 5e West Marches again, which I don't know if I'll run a 5e West Marches again, but if I do, I don't know what I'm going to do about the XP system, because CR is just a whack joke. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Would you say XP works better if you're trying to make a combat-heavy game, while Milestone encounters seem pointless, but with XP it gives them a reason to fight? I'd actually say, let me copy this here, because Dungeon Dad just messaged me about something. Yeah, so what I'll say is XP is great in a game where so like I would say like it depends on the system is what I'll say. Like milestone encounters seem pointless, but with XP it gives them a reason to fight. What I'll say is when you're running a milestone game, then combat is only whatever you make it out to be. And you gotta remember, right? From a purely as written approach to 5e, you are supposed to get into 6 to 8 encounters in a day. Not necessarily combat encounters, mind you, but just encounters overall. Then encounters can be 2d6 orcs. It can be, there's a river, how do you cross the river? Encounters basically usually indicate a potential for loss of resources. You're supposed to feel the loss of resources throughout the adventuring day. But the problem is, natively with 5e, is that natively, people don't want to get into 6 to 8 encounters a day because it's too much. And people typically don't do that, and people thus, like, get 1 combat encounter, 2 combat encounters, and then take a long rest, because long rest only takes 8 hours, right? So, the trick is then you have to basically rearrange what is an encounter in a milestone game. What is the encounter actually, doing? Is the encounter purely just for our entertainment because we'd like to do combat? Is the combat, going to be rewarding because we'll be getting some items out of it or some gold out of it? Or because, it is actually part of the quest we're actually trying to solve here? What is the encounter? Because in a milestone game, rolling 2d6 orcs typically doesn't matter. It typically doesn't. Man, my nose has been super itchy. So, at the same time, if you're running a combat-heavy game, XP, works fine. Like, if you only want your game to be all about killing 2d6 orcs, going to the next room, killing 2d6 more orcs, then yeah, XP is perfectly fine. But I think that there's just a better way to go about it. And I don't think that, I think that another thing that's important too is, and XP doesn't need to just come from killing monsters. XP can come from overcoming the challenge that the monster represents. Like a perfect example being, if your players are trying to get over a bridge and there's a troll on the bridge, they don't need to kill the troll to get the XP. They could potentially sneak around the troll, and that should give them the XP. They could seduce the troll, or, negotiate with the troll or whatever. And if they successfully do that and get across the bridge, then they navigated the challenge that the troll represents. And, the list could go on and on, right? Like, you could say the same with, like, sharks or piranhas infesting the moat. You could say the same about the grumpy old giant that's hurling rocks down on the mountain pass or whatever. You don't need to kill these things to overcome the challenge that they represent. You just need to overcome it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, and as mentioned here, you should award XP for the 3 pillars. Absolutely. Like, if you're running a game that's all about XP, then XP doesn't need to just be all about combat. XP can be for successfully playing to your traits. That's something that I really love in games, is when you have characters' traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, motivations, and all that fun jazz, you should be not only in-game rewarded for playing to those attributes, but you should also be, metaphysically rewarded, because that'll further incentivize playing to that character. Like, if your character has a flaw that says, I never back down from a challenge, like, that's a bad flaw, because, that can get you into fights that you may not want to get into. And that could potentially happen. Like, let's say your character's at the bar, and then they get into a fight with a dude that's way bigger than you, and you lose that fight. But you should be rewarded for playing into that flaw. Like, some game systems actively have it as part of their game system. 5e, and, naturally, I don't think D&D has ever had that. But you should, absolutely reward that. If it's on the character sheet, their ideal is sticking up for the person and sticking up for the little man, and, like, the little man, like, gets, jumped right in front of them, and they don't do anything about it, then you should reward them. Hey, that's what your character, your ideal was. Like, do you want to change your ideal, or, or whatever, right? Like that should definitely be something to consider. So what I'll say is XP for more than just combat. Milestone encounters need to be meaningful. T-Rexes need a roar that causes fear if they don't have it already. That's something, yeah. So I'll go ahead and I'll show it off again here for those of you that don't recall here. But I'm working on bestiaries like this here, where I'll try and zoom in a little bit more. Does that oh god, how's that come in on stream? Yeah, it looks fun. Like things like this, right, where you're not just attacking AC. Because in 5e, just attacking AC over and over and over again, that gets real tiring real quickly. Having attacks that attack their attributes, where they need to make saves or they need to make, checks or whatever, like that's fun. So having like the T-Rex not just biting people, but also having like a horrifying roar that makes people like afraid, like that's great. So that's definitely something I'm working on. And if you want a piece of that action, then you should check out my Patreon, where I'm coming out with these. I will be coming out with a full-blown bestiary full of monsters such as these that you don't have to sign up for my Patreon for. You can just do like a one-time purchase or whatever. But I'm working on that. And good things take time. Combat in my games is a chance to die, so the players need to make decisions whether the risk is worth potential reward. Encounters are solved by freeing to help Ghost and losing some of your water. Heck yeah. Message retracted all. 3.5 E had plenty of problems, but I think its CR system worked well. It at least made sense to me, aka the Marty McFly flaw. I reward it with inspiration at a bare minimum, for sure. Puzzle solving should be used more often too. Make them work for it. I give them inspiration points for a great in-character play. Attacking the other attributes is a really interesting idea. Yeah, so in regards of puzzle solving, that comes down to, are you challenging the players, or are you challenging the characters, or are you challenging both at the same time? Because there's plenty of times where you just challenge the character, right? Like, whenever you make them make a saving throw, like just out of nowhere, you have to make a saving throw. You're challenging the character because there is no, input that I could do anything about, right? But if it is, if you're challenging the player where there is no mechanical input, it's just purely on the player's input, that's something to consider. And then you've got the marriage between the two. You've got the thing of like, okay, there's a trap here, and you can navigate it with your person, but you can also like try. But once you do discover where the trap is, you have to overcome it mechanically with your character. Like it's always important to have the distinction, and for your players to understand the distinction between challenging the player, challenging the character. Very important. Attacking attributes is my go-to. Shadows, intellect devours, etc. can really throw off those silly builds. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so like pegging like strength down definitely hurts, the muscle-bound people, and knocking intelligence down and charisma down always hurts, those pesky casters and all that. And it always, like if their attributes get attacked, like and they get reduced for X amount of time, that makes them be forced to have a second game plan, which is good because you should never only have just one game plan, right? It should never just be as the Warlock, oh, I'm only ever going to cast Eldritch Blast, I'm only ever going to cast Eldritch Blast. It should be, okay, I'm going to cast Eldritch Blast, but if someone gets in my face, then I've got to do something else. Like there should always be a backup. Always. Do you ever convert older edition monsters to 5e to use? So, I personally have not. I've left that up to Dungeon Dad. For those of you who do not know who Dungeon Dad is, he is a D&D YouTuber who I've appeared on his channel before, and he does a bunch of that stuff. He basically just looks at older edition modules and adventures and whatever else, and retrofits a monster into the 5e as close to statistically as close as it can be. Which sometimes is a bit of an issue because, sometimes some of those older monsters had attacks that just cannot convert. So he has to come up with like new things and stuff. But I'm like not adverse to it. I probably should do that at some point. Like, so I'm gonna say no, but I should. Me personally, because I don't exclusively play 5e, I just haven't felt a need for it. Like I keep my 5e monsters with 5e, and I keep my old school monsters with old school. I think that's the beauty of playing multiple game systems, is that I'm perfectly fine keeping things where they are. But there is obviously a large portion of our community that only plays one game system, which I always think is unfortunate. But it is what it is. Okay. Oh god, what did I just click? I just clicked on something. Oh, probably shouldn't have clicked on that. It was a little spicy secret stuff. Our Warforged with AC-23 is now possessed by a ghost. Is our problem one of my groups had, cause I'd said play a Warforged Barbarian if you want. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing too, is there's like the AC junkies in 5e, and it's just like, I'm tired of like attacking against AC junkies because it's boring. Like, let's attack something else. Let's make it so that you're not just an AC junkie. Looking at older version modules is great for inspiration. Anyone running Curse of Strahd should look at older modules, particularly the way Fear and Madness are played. Yeah, so I recently like read through a bunch of the Ravenloft setting material for 2nd edition. And some of those adventures hold up so incredibly well. Oh my gosh. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Adventure Prep, Curse of Strahd. Where is it? Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on their names. There was like one. It was the Into the Spider's Web. I think that was Shri Raji. There was Web of Illusions. That's the name of it. Web of Illusions is really awesome. There's a one called The Created, which is about a toy shop murderer. That one's actually really good. Night of the Walking Dead. That one's a really great adventure. Like, man, there's some great old school Ravenloft adventure modules that are well worth picking up to this day. Oh, there's When Black Roses Bloom. That's a good one. There's a lot of great Ravenloft stuff for sure. Power gamers are fun. Power gamers do what's in their best interest, but the unfortunate truth of the matter is people ruin games for themselves, and I personally am of the belief that power gamers often do ruin the game for themselves by trivializing things that shouldn't be trivialized. So is there a class or subclass that you think needs a nerf or a buff? Here's my thinking on that is basically 5e, not just 5e, but tabletop role-playing games should not be competitive, or at least the average one. Like, there is some games that are competitive, and it's fine. But there should be a clear asymmetry to the game. Because the problem is, if the game does become symmetrical in that all these things are balanced against each other, then inevitably what happens is they become similar. There is no way you can ever have a game where you have 10 classes and they're all perfectly balanced. It never happens. You cannot point to me any video game, any tabletop role-playing game, anything ever where everything is perfectly balanced at all times ever. It just doesn't happen. What you need to do, and what they honestly need to do, is they need to recognize that this is a cooperative game, not a competitive one, Like, I know some of the power build people out there want to make it a competitive game where they do more damage or they do whatever, right? But the game is asymmetrical. Play up to its asymmetry. Play into the fact that the fighter can do things awesomely. Play into the fact that the wizard can do things awesomely. Play into all this and that. But play into the fact that sometimes they just suck. Because that's perfectly fine. You shouldn't be good at all times. If you're good at all times, that's boring. You know, the idea of the asymmetry at the table is not only for you to cover all of your bases, but also, interestingly enough, it presents the idea that, or not the idea, but it presents the basically the notion that the spotlight gets passed around. When the fighter gets to shine, good job, fighter, you're awesome, way to go. And then all of a sudden the fighter sucks at something, and then the wizard steps up. Oh yeah, wizard, that was awesome, good job. And then the wizard sucks at something. Oh hey, thief. Oh thief, that was cool. Yeah, let's go. And you have this rotating thing of like, okay, someone sucks at this, but someone was really good at that. That's honestly what it needs to be. So, you know, I as mentioned before, there's no balancing the game. If there's a game with more than 4 options in the game, then inevitably one of the options is better and one of the options is worse. Power gamers and power builds and power whatever, they're always going to be able to optimize and say, okay, this cantrip does this damage, but this cantrip does this damage, and thus this cantrip is better. People are going to just always pick that one, but then you're going to have people that just don't care. And the people that just don't care, they're the ones that are going to probably have more longevity out of the game. So what I'm going to say is, does there need to be any buffs or nerfs? Nope. Because there is no balance. There needs to be more other attribute attacks in 5e. Focusing on AC is boring and sometimes fristy, especially when you have players that make AC power builds. Yeah, I think yeah, that's what I'm doing. Is like I'm attacking attributes, and I'm gonna be introducing other things that attack other various aspects of your character as well. In fact, do you know the encounter of the ghost in the tunnels in Icewind Dale started watching you when he did the Icewind Dale stuff? Heck yeah, thank you. Point taken, but there are some classes, subclasses that aren't particularly subject matter experts. Yeah, so, I mean, like, you say, I mean, like, I'm trying to think, right? Like, every class in D&D as of this current moment in time, they have their niche, but the unfortunate issue is some people's niches are really, really tiny, and then some people's niches are, like, more far-reaching. For example, being like the fighter. The fighter's niche is that they can outlast everyone in a marathon. If you get into 10 encounters in a day, the fighter is going to be the last man standing because they have the second highest HP pool in the game besides the barbarian. But even they outlast the barbarian because they are going to be able to evade more damage. They're going to be able to heal up more because they're second wind. They're going to be able to, you know, do certain activities and whatnot. So the fighter excels at that. The real issue with the balance of the game isn't just the fact that natively they just aren't balanced already, but also a very important issue is people run the game in a way that facilitates a bad time for some characters. And that's the truth of the matter. I mean, for example, being, as we mentioned before, 5e, 6 to 8 encounters in a day. But guess what? If you don't run 6 to 8 encounters a day, then the fighter feels bad because they don't get to show off the fact that they can go for the full marathon. If you run 1 combat encounter a day, the wizard excels because the wizard can drop all their high-level, spell slots and then sleep it off and then repeat process and just do the supernova repeat notion. The wizard casts Fireball, does 8d6 damage to 3 targets in 1 turn. The fighter only gets 2 swings a turn, and thus they only do 46 damage to 1 person. And, so it's just a matter of the game has to be ran to facilitate a better time for all classes involved. A lot of times that doesn't happen. A lot of times people run an adventure a certain way, and some classes get high and dry, and some classes just excel. So that's something important to consider. Same, I actually added so much more to the story because of your guides. Thank you. I play Rangers when I get to play, so I can suck equally at all 3 tiers of play. Hey. You know, I mean, Ranger's a perfect example, right? Like, the Ranger excels at a very niche application of they're really good at the exploration side of things because they just straight up, you know, negate, you know, some of the exploration mechanics, which there barely is any already. But guess what? Because there's so few exploration rules at all, most DMs don't run a game that facilitates exploration, and thus the Ranger doesn't get to apply their niche. You know, is what it is. Is the disparity between marshals and spellcasters real, or is it something else? It's a combination of both. So it is absolutely a combination of both. It is a combination of, you know, the fighter can absolutely, like, if I ran a game, I could run a game where you hate being a wizard, right? I could run a game where being the wizard is just a miserable time because you get targeted all the time, and you know the spells don't work, and you know the enemies always make their saves, and this and that, right? But in a general vacuum, in the vacuum that is people typically running the average game of 5e, spellcasters are better, and that is because, as mentioned before, you know, people don't facilitate a good time for the marshals. Like, you know, a perfect example being like, you know, another example of like the 10 encounters. You know, the fighter excels, but no one runs 10 encounters a day. People run the 1 in combat encounter a day. The wizard gets the supernova with their high level spells, and then boom, they show off. And then also very importantly is few people reward the marshals with the capability to perform more than their little playstyle. So like a spellcaster, for example, a wizard. The wizard could cast Fireball, but they could cast, a Mass Illusion to distract the enemies, or they could hold someone in place, or they could, they basically the casters have a huge variety in their repertoire, and marshals typically are not given that variety. And whenever you provide a scenario where being a marshal, you can't just beat up the enemy, or you can't do something practical, like something can only be accomplished through magic, then naturally, the spellcasters are going to excel. And unfortunately, naturally, how most people run the game, the spellcasters do have an edge. There doesn't need to be one. If you run it a certain way, you can absolutely make it so the marshals are loving life and the spellcasters hate life. But as written, or not as written, but, purely as people run it. Not usually the case. It's real, but mostly on DM's side of the issue. A very easy buff for Rangers to make favored foe concentration free. Did that for my Fey Wanderer and Custrad. It's just enough buff. Favored foe is not concentration. What do you mean? What do you mean? There's no way favored foe is concentration. There's no way. Favorite enemy. Yeah, favorite enemy isn't concentration. You just get some bonuses on them. Hey, I think your DM was being mean to you. I joke. I think Rangers are good. Just need a DM to not handwave exploration. LOL. Yeah, I mean that's honestly the issue is of when it comes to the 3 pillars of D&D: combat, exploration, roleplay. We get tons and tons of rules in combat. We get next to no rules on exploration. We get next to no rules on social interaction. And what ends up happening is most people run social interaction in however way they want to run social interaction. But most people run exploration in however way they want to run exploration. And most people, I think nowadays, don't like exploration. They don't want to deal with the hex roll. They don't want to deal with, dungeon delving. They don't want to deal with all these things. I think a lot of the average games nowadays just handwave exploration to being, okay, you walk down the street or you walk down the road and then so-and-so happens, which is unfortunate. Agreed, Ma. Good DM allows each player to shine, and better DM helps their players choose something besides Ranger. About to blow your mind. How would you run a rewarding encounter for marshals without making the caster sad? That's an issue, right? So, like, one, it comes down to the individuals. Like, me personally, I never get sad if I'm playing, like, a spellcaster and then the enemy, like, is resistant to my spells. Because, you know, I'm happy that, you know, my homie gets to shine, right? But I think a lot of people really want to always shine because they show up to the table and they want the game to be sunshine and rainbows, right? Man, my nose is super itchy. So, how would you run an encounter for marshals without making the caster sad? I mean, that's a tough one. I think the real thing is you have to present a scenario where the marshals get to shine for being marshal type people in a environment where in Magic cannot easily solve the issue. And that's a tough one. Like, that's something you're going to always have to, like, you know, grasp straws at, right? So I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if you're here, but, like, a perfect example of an encounter could be as you're fighting, you know, you're fighting the enemy. All of a sudden, there's a cat stuck in a tree, and you really need to get the cat out of the tree before, you know, the tree falls over. Bam, right there. You're running a scenario where, okay, how are we going to solve this? Are the marshals going to go beat up the enemy, or are the marshals going to go try and climb the tree? Are the spellcasters, are they going to go try and get the cat out of the tree, or are they going to fight the enemy? You have to present scenarios like that, where basically there isn't just a single issue. You need to present scenarios where there is multiple issues. And, you know, the issues can be as simple as the enemy has X HP, reduce them down to 0 HP. But that's pretty, you know, traditional, pretty boring. Presenting scenarios where it's like, okay, as you're in this, you know, 3-story dungeon, there is there's like a greasy rope, and you can slide down to try and intercept the plant monster that's climbing up it, you know, something like that, right? You know, you got to come up with like scenarios all the time of like it can't just be solved by, you know, pressing the do damage button. You got to come up with scenarios that reward people for creativity. You got to come up with scenarios that reward them for using their action during combat to do something that isn't just combat. So, having encounters with more than just one problem / one solution. Solution. That's my go-to there. How do you handle illusion magic in combat? Is there checks involved? Creating intelligence affect anything? Yeah, so that entirely depends on the individual spell, because 5e's repertoire, there's plenty of illusion spells. Some of them natively say, hey, like, a character can scrutinize it if they make a check, or they can make a save, or do whatever, right? What I'm going to say is, though, yeah, creature intelligence should absolutely be a thing. If you have, you know, if you're going up against the aberration or monstrosity, and this thing is like literally, you know, it lives in a cave its whole life and all it does is eat people, then, you know, probably isn't going to be able to suss out an illusion. But at the same time, then all of a sudden you've got you're going against the hyper intelligent wizard and sees an illusion spell, then they may be able to be like, oh, hey, you know, that's, I definitely know that's some shenanigans right there. So it definitely does come down on a case-by-case basis with the spell, with the enemy that they're going up against, with the illusion displayed itself. You know, for example, being like, if someone like tries to create like a rock. Oh yeah, for example, being a dumb creature, like even a dumb creature might be able to suss out an illusion if they are programmed to routine. So like if they're in a cave and the player is like, you know, make an illusion to look like a rock. Even like an owlbear, let's say. An owlbear would probably recognize if there was like something off about the dimensions of their nest. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's always definitely something Something to think about there. So yeah, depends on spell and on creature. Favorite foe from Tasha's. That I don't know. I mean, the funny thing is, I'm a player nonstop, so I don't bother my. I'm a DM nonstop, so I really don't look into player character abilities too often. What's the most broken spell combo you can think of if you allowed concentration spells to be stacked during the casting of Time Stop? Oh my gosh. I mean, at that level, you could just get like some easy dumb things, like delayed fireballs, right? Like you could just multiple delayed fireballs. Because delayed fireball, the whole thing about that is basically like as you hold it, it builds up. So if you could have multiple concentrations and you just cast the spell, delayed fireballs multiple times, you could just have like multiple little pinpricks of like fiery heat that just explode out and just do a ton of damage, right? Like that would just be pretty hardcore. Hey, broski, I'm running my first campaign as DM Wednesday for Dragon Heist. Your playlist has been huge help, as I have no clue what I'm doing. Thank you. Thank you, Eli. Thank you so very much. I had a couple of encounters in rickety wooden structure, and confined wooden space and desert is not good for a fireball. That it is not. Favorite foe. Feature replaces favorite enemy. When you hit a creature with an attack roll, you can mark the target as your favorite foe for 1 minute, or until you lose your concentration. I haven't had anybody use that ability in any of my campaigns yet. That's interesting. Makes sense. Like giving them a puzzle combat in a way. Yeah, so in regards of like the multiple solutions or problems. Yeah, so the one is like, as mentioned before, there's enemies, but there's also the cat in the tree. Play along those lines. You either present 2 or 3 different scenarios of like, okay, as you're fighting, there's something crawling out of the well, and there's a burning building, and there's kids inside, and also there is a cat on the roof. Play along with that, and present multiple, problems, and allow the players to have the autonomy to select how they want to best approach it, because maybe the fighter just does want to deal damage and goes after the monster, right? But then other times the fighter could be like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna daringly dash into the burning building and save the kids, right? Sometimes it's good to allow there to be, creative solutions. Did older editions do anything better than 5e? Is there something that should come back in 5.5e? So what I'll say is better is always subjective, right? Like, I could sit here and say, like original D&D was so good, back when there was only 3 classes, when there was only the fighting man, the cleric, and the magic user, right? But then the pesky thief came along, and the thief ruined the game. Like, I could say that, right? But ultimately, what I like about some of the older editions is specifically the simplicity of combat, specifically the lack of linear progression in your character's abilities, specifically in regards of, I'm trying to think of some other things too, but what I think should come back in 5.5e is honestly not going to work. Like, the things that I like about some of the older editions are just straight up not going to work in 5th edition. But here's what I want. I want for 6th edition, when that comes out, I want there to be 3 versions of 6e. I want there to be 6e basic, 6e standard, and 6e advanced. So with 6e basic, this is for people that have never played a tabletop role-playing game in their life, and you don't want to bore them. Because as most people have probably encountered, I know I've encountered it quite a lot, If you get someone who's never touched a tabletop role-playing game in their life, and you show them the character sheet of 5e, and you tell them, oh, hey, here's all these abilities and all these numbers, and hey, you have a 16, that means you got a +3, but you actually have a +5 because you have a +2 floating around here, and because you're 5th level, that means you actually get to cast 3rd level spells. When you describe these numbers and these terms and all these mechanics, that drives people away. So 6e Basic would be a simple version of the game. Incredibly simple numbers, simple mechanics, simple design, simple everything. And this is to get people started. Now, whether this be, adults that have never played a tabletop role-playing game in their life, this is for kids because, your kids can't solve the problem of, what is, 5 plus 17, all those things. Regardless, 6e Basic is for the basics. It is for getting people to the table. Because there's never been any edition of D&D that's been good for getting people to the table, ever. Every single edition has been atrocious at that. 6e Standard is 6e Standard. 6e Standard is the general rules of the game that we all know. If you played 5e, then you know how to play 6e because, if you played 5e, then you know how to play every other game system, right? And then 6e Advanced is all of the optional rules. So with the 6e, basically you just have all the basic, the 6e Standard stuff is like, oh yeah, rest are handled this way. But then 6e Advanced is like, okay, we're going to present to you 10 different ways on how you can handle rest. Okay, we're going to present to you, 10 different ways on how you can handle exploration. We're going to present to you, all these variant rules on death and dying and this and that. They did a tiny bit of this, and I do mean a tiny bit of this with the 5e DMG. They added some optional and variant rules, but they're so hidden, they're so obscure, they're so minuscule that no one ever bothers looking at them. But I truly do believe that if 6e came out with that 3 core set of basic for the noobs, standard for the people that are okay with that, and then advanced for the people that want that major crunch in their game, that would be great. So is older edition thing? Yes, but it's subjective. I don't think anything is or even can come back for 5.5. That's my thought on that. Now that you've read Favorite Foe, you can see how making it concentration free just makes sense. Yes. I'd still concentrate on spike growth. Never bothered much with hunters or Favorite Foe. I actually prefer Favorite Enemy as more flavor for me. And when it's applicable, it's really good for exploration. Yes. That's why Favorite Foe is problematic if it requires con. I just told my Fey Wanderer player that not to worry about it. Cool. Because Ranger has tons of good concentration spells, better worth your concentration and very few spell slots. Yes. Ranger is very much one of the odd balls in the 5e class lineup of how its spell system works and what spells you get access to and all that fun jazz. Ranger is just I think Ranger and like Bard are just like they just fell into these weird cracks that they didn't know how to solve. And yeah, it's weird. It's weird. I definitely like. I want Bard to like. I hope they fix Bard because I don't like Bard being just a spellcaster. I think Bard needs to be what it really is. It being a class that has supernatural, capabilities. Them being, the skill monkey, and them being the buffer and the debuffer and things like that, which has happened in previous editions of D&D. In 5e, they just basically said, "Oh yeah, the bard, they're just a spellcaster. They're like a wizard light." That's boring. Are party pets ever a good idea, especially ones that grow to be powerful? Here's my thought process on that. So, whenever, pets is just one of these things where it's like, You know, most groups have the thing where they just latch on to the pet. It's like, oh, can we keep it? Can we keep it? And mind you, when we say pets, that doesn't even necessarily mean something that's like inanimate or not inanimate, but not intelligent. Like the party pets can be, you know, like the retainers or the cute hirelings or, you know, whatever that join the party, right? I think that pets can be done fine. The real issue is how much they intrude upon the gameplay. You know, specifically with combat. With combat taking as long as it does in 5e, if the party is adding pets that just like take up more of the time, the thing to remember is like, you know, the pet is typically either controlled by the DM or by one player. And when time is being dedicated to the pet, that's less time being dedicated to everyone else at the table. So, do I think pets are ever a good idea? I'm going to say, yeah, they can be. And especially ones that grow up to be powerful. What I'll say to that is, you know, that's honestly a really great reward. Like, if you pick up you pick up the baby pup, and then you, over the course of the gameplay, you actually transform it into a wolf, you know, because, or maybe then eventually evolves into a direwolf. That's a cool progression. And, you know, that's a great story of like, yeah, we got this direwolf pup and, you know, we raised it up and eventually grew up to be an awesome direwolf mount. You know, that's cool. Like, that's got a story behind it. You know, but once again, does it intrude upon the gameplay? Does it intrude upon what the adventure is supposed to be? Does it intrude upon the player autonomy? Does it intrude upon these things? It can be. It just depends on your party, depends on the circumstances, depends on a various number of factors. Can be, but they may intrude upon gameplay. I was told my ranger. I also told my ranger they could prepare spells. In my mind, rangers should be flexible and adaptable. It's in the archetype. I dig it. I'm playing a bard next. It's gonna be based on Austin Powers. Groovy, baby. What? No fun allowed. What measures, tools do you use to measure offensive CR and defensive CR when homebrewing? How I measure homebrew, or how I measure CR is I just slap a number on there. I don't care. I know that most people don't actually care about CR. I know most people don't care about the XP. That's for darn sure. But in regards to the CR, you know, CR is just such a terrible number. You can have a CR3 creature TPK a party of 4 level 3s, and then, you know, like you roll that same encounter again, and depending on the dice rolls and depending on the players that you had, depending on the classes, depending on so many different factors, that can be from like a difference between a TPK and, you know, a breeze, because the party deals with it in one round. CR is just a made-up, nonsensical number, and it just cannot work because of the humongous variety and variation to be found in our game. And it really sucks that there really isn't a great way to go about it. I don't know how 5e could possibly rectify the CR system that is currently in the game. I just don't know. And it's an issue because you're supposed to be able to look at a monster like me personally, because I've been a DM for a super duper long time and run a bajillion games. I can look at a monster and be like, yeah, I'll throw it at the party, no problem. But I am a nerd. I think the important thing when making any of these like things, you know, monsters and whatever else, they need to be basically read by someone who's never read it before, right? Like someone that's never understood what a CR21 creature is. Like someone who's never picked up D&D and looks at the Lich, for example. The Lich is a CR21. You players cannot even be level 21. So right there, you know, that's going to get that new player thinking like, wait, so then when do my players go up against it? There's no level 21. How does that work? Well, actually, even though it is a CR21, realistically, a party of X level, you know, party members with these magical items in this setting can easily defeat a Lich. But once again, new players don't know that, right? New players just don't get it. CR is a busted number. It needs to be fixed for new people, but I just don't know how they're gonna solve it. No clue. Summons are worse than pets for that, and oh god. Summons are worse for pets than that. There isn't really a fix for summons. Yeah, I mean, like, there's like summon woodland beings and summon elementals and like all those spells. Those things just break the CR because, or not just the CR, but they just break the nature of balance because, the more PCs there are, the more enemies have to hit and the less damage output they're doing roughly and this and that. Summons are just not a good addition to the game. Ma, the Shepherd Druid ruined summons IMO. Yeah, I mean, summons are just, they're just basically like you're adding a humongous like basically if you like look at your party CR and be like, okay, they're like 10, there's 5 level 10 PCs, they're this CR rating. If anyone has the capability of summoning, all of a sudden their CR just like shoots up immensely. It's like terrible. Lore question: is there any reason chromatic dragons never get the ability to shapeshift? Yes, I seem to recall listening about that at some point. The real problem with asking me about lore is I don't know much about lore, sadly. You have to go to my other YouTube contemporaries, such as Jordan the PH is Silent, AJ Pickett, or Dungeon Dad, or any one of those, nerds that likes lore. I personally don't know too much about the lore. Yeah, I run, an adventure where the lore doesn't need to be super duper intricate, or at least not tied to, the lore that is in D&D. I'm sure there's a reason for it, though. There has to be. Maybe it's something along the lines of like so that they don't like beguile like civilizations under their chaotic nature. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry. Worst subclasses: Assassin, Rogue. Other classes can do its disguise stuff better. Anything with actor feet. And surprise is janky. Am I wrong? The Assassin, basically they have this humongously strong ability of like, oh yeah, if they get to go in a round, they get a crit, even if it's like not a crit on the first round. Awesome. But then they also get this ability that's like, oh, if you spend a week in town and spend 25 gold, you can disguise yourself. But it's like, I feel like most DMs ever would just be like, okay, why would you need a class ability to do that? Which, interestingly enough, also points to the idea of if you have a class feature in a game that says you can do something, inevitably what that says from a balance perspective is you cannot do that unless you have that feature. Meaning that if you have the assassin in a game, or if you're running purely as written, right, you are not allowed to disguise yourself for, after a week and spend 25 gold. You're physically not allowed to do that because only the assassin can do that, right? Like, it's kind of dumb. So then, how do you know that your homebrews are appropriate for your party to fight? Is that something you just got to feel for? Yeah, that's honestly the sad part is that's just something you got to feel for. What inevitably happens is like, so if you're running for random people all the time, and you're running different classes, and you're running in there, different classes and different races and different combos and different whatever, you're not gonna have a decent idea about like some things. But if you are specifically running for the same group, and for a fact that Jerry the fighter, oh, that idiot, he's always gonna run in, and for a fact that Sally the warlock, she's always going to cast this one spell, right? Eventually, if you're running for the same group and they're running the same, creature or PCs or whatever, you eventually do get a feel for what is going to work, to give them an interesting engagement. And, that's just something you're going to have to work on is, it's something you're going to get a feel for. Much like riding a bike, you are going to fall and it's going to suck. You are going to be, as a fresh young DM, you're going to come up with a super duper fun encounter that's going to be a blast. but your players just blow through it, or it's going to be a super fun blast, but then it's super overpowered and your players TBK. It's going to happen, inevitably, unless you're willing to fudge things right on the spot, which, that's a different topic of whether you should fudge things or not. But in regards of if your homebrew is appropriate for the party, there is no conceivable way you can write a monster and be like, that's perfectly fair for a party of this number of this, 4 level 5 PCs. Never. Because 4 level 5 PCs is going to be so different of if you've got 3 rogues, 1 warlock, 1 fighter, or you have 1 paladin, 1 cleric, 1, monk, whatever, right? The difference in skills and challenges and this and that is just all over the place. So, yeah, it's just something you get a feel for. 6 or 7 CR shadows grouped together is way harder than the CR says it should be. That's another thing too, is like there's like CR calculators. I think there's like I think it's called like Kobold Fight Club, KFC. And that one has like basically a thing of like, okay, if your party fights, 1 orc, it's like a quarter challenge rating or half challenge rating or whatever. But if you fight 2 orcs at the same time, that means it's this a CR rating because there's 2 of these monsters. But if you fight 4 orcs at the same time, it's this CR rating because you're fighting 4 orcs. And this and that, it continues on. Statistically, if you throw enough cats at Tiamat, even though cats are like a CR 0 and they do 1 point of damage, theoretically, if you throw a million cats at Tiamat, they can kill Tiamat, right? It's just the thing of like, what is, what can the creatures possibly do? How many of them are there? What's the environment like? What are the characters' capabilities? What are the players' capabilities? There's so many variables. So many variables. I love the fact that you can, no summons? I love the fact that you can be a summoner just like how necromancies exist. Well, I mean, I know that a lot of groups ban necromancy at the table because purely as written, a necromancer in 5e, a wizard, they can, like, at level, 6, I think they can have, 16 skeletons and or zombies running around at all times. And, it exponentially multiplies. Like, at level 8, I think you can have, 38 or 42 or something like that. And it just goes on, and it's just okay, do we want the capabilities of having this many creatures at the table? Don't get me wrong, Quentin. Summons can be powerful, but the fact that the Shepherd Druid effectively nerfed all of their summoning classes is horse dookie IMO. I agree for that part. The action economy and how much it slows the game is why summons suck. Like, I play Rangers and Druids, but avoid them. I don't want my friends waiting for my turn for a half hour. Yeah, and that's another thing that really sucks, too, is another great discrepancy, or not great discrepancy, I guess it is a great discrepancy, between marshals and casters is if the marshal says, I swing my sword twice, they can roll it really quickly, we can solve, okay, you hit, you did the damage, good. But then casters come along, and casters muck up everything, right? You have to read the 2 paragraphs of, okay, how does this illusion spell work? Okay, they have to make a save, and if they fail, then they see this, and the only way they can get out of it is they do that, and they take this much damage, but when does the damage happen? Is it at the start of their turn, or is it after their turn? Where is it? Right? And, that right there is just some of the major, major issues of spellcasting is some of the spells are just ridiculous. Once you play D&D enough, you definitely recognize, okay, you're casting Fireball. Okay, we all know that it's going to hit a 20-foot area. It's going to do 8d6 damage. Just roll the dice, right? Real quickly. Fireball, once you looked at it once or twice, you can get that. But there are spells that you just don't come back to regularly because at this point there is over 500 spells in D&D and 5e. And some of those spells, just, every time they get brought up, it just causes everyone to groan, and you got to pull out the magnifying glass to research on the tomes of, okay, how does the spell actually function again? So let me get this straight. You can move, you spawn 10 stone panels and they can move around, you can make them a semicircle. How does this work, right? It's just, like it sucks when the fighter takes 30 seconds for their turn, and then all of a sudden the wizard takes 5 minutes. Like that's just terrible. Do you think D&D or the community is heading in a more narratively driven direction? I'm finding it hard to find other people that enjoy combat or exploration. Yes, I do believe that both D&D and the community are moving toward a narratively driven direction. Oh, I just heard something going down the street that scared the crap out of me. Now, I believe that it is, unfortunately, because of what people want, right? I think one way I'd like to describe it is we're growing up in a superhero world, right? We're growing up in this world where everyone for the past 20 years has been subjected to the MCU, right? We're all watching Iron Man and then Spider-Man and then Superman, or Superman's DC, but you get what I mean, right? And basically, we're being just shown all these, things of being awesome action stars and being cool and being epic and going off on awesome adventures and we're all these superheroes that are infallible and we are going to be doing all these kooky wacky things and oh yeah, remember that time I said that funny thing to that one person, haha. And just natively, I think if you were to grab a random person off of the street and said, hey, let's play D&D, which do you care most about? Do you want to talk to people? Do you want to fight things? Or do you want to explore around? I'm willing to bet you the average human being is going to default to the thing that they know. The average human being doesn't explore around dungeons. The average human being doesn't get into fights. The average human being does interact with other people. And thus, the narrative side of the game is just there. We all watch TV. We all played games. Video games in particular. We've all played these things. And narrative is just a thing in our lives that is so frequent. But combat and exploration just isn't. So I think for the average human being, I think that narrative is here to stay. Now, do I personally think that narrative should take over D&D? Absolutely not. I believe that D&D should truly lean in on the three pillars of the exploration, the roleplay, and the social interaction. But I'm willing to bet that some things may go off to the wayside, which they already have, right? 5e barely has any, exploration rules. It does have a bejesus ton of combat rules, but, the exploration's hardly there. Yes, because narrative is our human default. Interesting, Mom. My druid has you summon beast and summon fade to a powerful effect without slowing the game. As maybe because it's only one creature. A raptors with conjure animals is a different story. LMAO. Yeah. Another really important thing too is just understanding the rule of spell. Like as mentioned before, if someone casts Crown of Madness and no one knows how Crown of Madness works, you got to sit there and read. Okay, how does this work? When is the effect? How much damage? This and that. And inevitably, you get people that say, "Oh, hey, summon animals. That looks cool." And then they cast it during the game, and then like, "Okay, how does this actually work?" And then you got to spend time. Okay, summon animals is you summon this many, and then this and that, and they go. When do they go again? Oh, you got to roll for their own initiative, and that definitely can be quite a time sink. Yeah, those are okay. They're old spells like Conjure Woodland Being, etc. The problem, like, hold up while I take my Squirrel Army's turn. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it also comes down to like when you design a combat encounter. Typically, is the combat encounter designed to be a challenge for the characters, with or without their summons? Like, are you just naturally bumping up the way you call it thing, the challenge of the combat because you know that they're going to summon things? Are you artificially inflating the combat because the party is artificially inflating their combat prowess by summons? So do you, in response, have to raise up the HP and raise up the damage and raise up the number of monsters that are present in the combat? Inevitably, just doing that also just slows the game down. It is an arms race, right? It is an arms race. What is my favorite monster to run? Ooh, okay, that's a tough one. Oh, what is my favorite monster to run? I don't know off the top of my head. I have ran quite a few monsters in my time. I'd say Beholder. And the reason why I like running the Beholder is because, one, it is an incredibly unique challenge. And, when it comes to it's the orc. The orc is going to just fight toe-to-toe with you. Oh, the dragon's going to fly around and strafe and then poke around, do this and that. But the Beholder presents a unique scenario, unique challenge that no other monster represents in the game, right? The Beholder shuts down magic. It floats in the air. It has random attacks that do random effects. The randomness and the shutting down of abilities and certain functions presents the players with a encounter that, like, their normal gameplay, their normal playbook probably doesn't work, right? Like, oh, you got the spellcasters? That's cool. It's staring at you. You can't cast spells. Oh, it's floating in the air. Hey, barbarian, you can't swing your axe at something that's floating 30 feet in the air, right? So the Beholder just presents an incredibly unique encounter because the players can't deal with it, like in the normal sense. And also, very importantly, is the fact that it is truly a random creature because you don't know what the heck, rays you're going to get. Is it going to be a death ray? Is it going to be petrification? Is it going to be psionics? Is it going to be, a little charm? And the fact that, like, the players, like, if they get into a fight with the Beholder, they, one, have to come up with a game plan on how to combat it now, but now also have to combat against random effects hitting them. Like, that's great. I absolutely love it. Green dragons, for me, they are hilarious. I had the party inadvertently working for one by going after a nearby black dragon. I had blackmailed the local mayor to hire the party. Heck yeah. Is it worth doing practice encounters as a new DM to get a feel for how a creature or scenario would play? What I'll say is yes, but. Yeah, and that's going to be a yes, but here. What I'll say is I wouldn't do practice encounters with the players that I intend to run them through the scenario because that, ruins, part of the flavor and fun of the new discovery of this new encounter. And what I'll say as well is the problem is, so one, you don't want to run it for the players that you're going to run it for. But two, even if you run it for players that you don't plan on playing for, they're going to be, they're not going to be playing the same as your players. They're going to be taking different actions. Maybe they're bringing different classes to the table. Maybe they are going to just, use different, a variety of spells. Maybe they're going to try and, do something different, right? And so it's impossible to really say, in a vacuum of oh, hey, how's this monster going to work? Especially because, it's going to come down to you are going to, as the DM, present the monster in a certain way. But the monster not only presents in a certain way, it has to react in a certain way. While you can present it a certain way, for sure that on turn one, it's always going to use this one breath ability. Then what happens on turn two? Is it going to, try and beat up on the caster that's right on top of it? Is it going to try and leap around and try and lure them to a trap? Is it going to, do whatever, right? And it's just honestly, really hard to say The worst thing too is this really does suck. I've experienced this a lot, and plenty of other people have experienced this a lot. The worst is when you come up with a unique encounter, and you're like, oh boy, this is gonna be a fun encounter, and then your players ruin it, because that's what players do. Players are there to ruin your experiences, but in ruining your experience, they're adding a unique experience for everybody, and that's fine. It does suck when you come up with that fun encounter and the players just, solve it turn one, they blow it up, they kill it, or they ruin it, or they run away from it, or they do whatever, right? But that's what players do. If you didn't want players ruining your encounter, you would write a book, right? So what I would say is you can mentally practice it. I probably wouldn't mechanically practice it. And I would also just be receptive to the fact that, the monster isn't just a stagnant thing that is always doing standard attacks. The monster is reactionary. The players are reacting to the challenge you present. The monster is reacting to the challenge that the players represent. So, I'd say mentally practice, mechanics may be too much. That's what I'll say. Throw stuff at the party and wave. Stop sending stuff in when it feels like they're struggling. If you worry about TVK, only you know the health of the monsters. Also, monster players can flee. True, but that also does harken back to mechanics. 5e mechanically barely has anything next to chases or running away. And that unfortunately sucks because mechanics aren't there. People typically don't try and, use them. In old school rules, there was a clear, ruling on, okay, if you run away from the monster, can you actually run away from it? Do you drop some loot, or do you drop some food, or does someone get sacrificed? And then you can run away. 5e does have like these chase mechanics, but nobody ever uses those things. I've only ever used them like twice. Purely as written anyway. Or morale. Yeah, morale is another thing too. I wrote about that in I wrote about morale in one of my magazines. Morale is definitely something I would definitely strongly recommend, because morale allows you to throw greater numbers of enemies at the players and have a reasonable reason why they, don't fight to the death or they run away, right? Let's say, for example, like you have a party of level 3s, and they go up against a fair challenge with them would be like, let's say, like 6 orcs. Instead of it being just 6 orcs, you could instead then decide to run 12 orcs against them. But once they get down to 6, they probably are going to break because the morale is low. And then that adds a cool feeling of like, okay, we overcame a mighty challenge and we made the enemy run away. Like, that feels cool. Do I ever hit unconscious players? No, but I have hit unconscious characters. In all seriousness, though. Yeah, so hitting unconscious, down PCs or whatever, I've definitely done it, right? Because I like to play the monsters as how they should be played, right? Like, if you've got a monster that wants to kill the PC, it's going to try and kill them, right? Like, it's like, okay, that's cool that, all right, the wizard goes down, and then there's the barbarian that's raging with 100 hit points right there, but you're going up against the intelligent, wizard. What's the wizard going to do? The wizard's going to kill the person that's on the ground because they're defenseless right now, right? It always comes down to circumstances of, like, what is the monster after, and what is the terrain looking like, and, what's the environment here, what are the goals of the PCs, what are the goals of the monsters, and also, very importantly, is what are the tone, theme, and setting of the campaign. There are plenty of games where player death just isn't on the table because they don't want PC death. And then there's plenty of games where, hey, you know, you're going to die. Always have a second character sheet on standby, right? So, yes, I have attempted to smite those downed PCs. A town guard doesn't get paid enough to fight to the death. Exactly, right? You know, like, so many times I see so many people play 5e where it's like, okay, the monster always fights to death. And it's like, I mean, like, it makes life really, really simple, right? Oh, hey, they only, like, nobody ever runs away. Nobody ever, you know, surrenders or whatever. But honestly, like, having them run away, having them surrender, it just makes life, you know, feel real. I have been going, by the way. Oh, God. I have been going since 6:30 my time, which was, you know, a pretty long time ago. I wish this thing actually told me how long I've been going for. So I think I'm going to end it in 7 minutes. Here. So if you have any you know, questions, comments, concerns, gripes, moans, complaints of anything of that nature, feel free to ask. In that scenario, I'd charm the barbarian and have them hit the down PC. Yeah, that's a way to go right there. I remember I was running with that West Marches game, and I remember, like, there was a scenario where a PC got Crown of Thorns or Crown of Madness, and, like, just immediately turned and, like, knocked someone down, and everyone's like, oh my god. Those sketchy scenarios. Oh man, oh me, oh my. Looking in total here, I see that I got 148 views on this live stream. That's good stuff. Good stuff. And the stream was also a test to see how YouTube rating worked, because YouTube has now implemented, you know, your once you end a stream, you can host all your viewers over to someone else. But the thing about it is basically they don't allow you to raid anybody that you don't know. They have to give you permission. And the reason they stated is because they wanted to, you know, make sure that you can't hate raid people, because Twitch has a really big issue with people getting hate raided all the time. And they don't solve that issue. So YouTube has figured a way to do that. And unfortunately, what that means is less people are going to get raided, because, you know, you can't just host anybody randomly. Vampires underpowered? Vampires underpowered. I'd say no. I'd say no. People just need to run them more effectively. Because the thing, yeah, like a vampire, like, is typically going to be, you know, old. They're typically going to be smart. They're going to be wise. And they're typically going to have a whole bunch of thralls underneath them, right? Like, they're going to have a whole bunch of minions to do all their fighting and bidding. You know, like, you know, a vampire isn't going to fight a full, fair fight. They're going to whittle down the party, and they're going to, you know, slink in the shadows. And if they get beat up, they're going to try and hide away. What has been your favorite module so far? That would be Tomb of Annihilation. Tomb of Annihilation. Also, I did that. And the reason for that is because Tomb of Annihilation has so many things that I love. It has exploration of a vast, beautiful jungle. It has the combat of dealing with all sorts of weird, foul monsters that inhabit this jungle and all the undead and all the factions therein. And it has the social interaction of all of the aforementioned factions and this beautiful city that is a great hub for the party to basically make their forays into the jungle. Not only does it hit these three pillars of D&D incredibly well, it also provides a very, very driving goal for the campaign as a whole. It provides, just this fantastic setting. It's got so many things that I just absolutely love. And I think Tomb of Annihilation is my favoritist. And I think it is, in fact, the best of the 5e modules. Though everyone simps really hard over Curse of Strahd, I think they should give Tomb of Annihilation a look. Yeah, as the DM, there's always a way to use your character abilities against ourselves. Tomb of Annihilation, remember you saying that? Ever running it again? I am. I've ran it 3 times. I'm going to be running it some more. Tomb of Annihilation is my favorite too. Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be running it some more. I can't get enough of that module. Like, I'm looking at it, right here in my little stack of books. But I can't get enough of it. I love it so much. Every time I run it, it's an entirely different feel, and I get to explore these places, these players, and I get to do all these fun things. I just love it so much. In fact, actually, like I've ran it for 5e, and I actually want to run it using an old school system because I want to take it back, the old school style, and I'm curious to see how it'll like. I think it'll hold up incredibly well. In fact, I think it'll very much be, classico using old school gaming. So instead of it just being like the party of 4 going into the jungles by themselves, it'll be the party, but it'll also be them, moving into and them moving with a whole bunch of hireling, henchmen, retainers, and all that fun jazz. Will you be streaming it? So, I've got a plan for games. So I'll talk a bit about that here as I'm wrapping up this stream here. I've got several plans for streamed games. 1, I could just easily just stream the game and, just post it up. But 2, I've also got some other ideas. One of my ideas being I record the game and then I upload it. But when I upload it, it has edits in it. And very, very importantly, it has my GM notes about why I'm doing certain things. So, for example, being like, as I'm DMing, I say, "Hey, player, roll, a d20 here," and then I, like writing on the, the screen there, I'd say, "Okay, here's why I'm making them roll this," without, letting the players in on it, right? And I think that could be really fun to have GM notes to, give insights on as to, what my thought process is and what I'm doing and, how I might use this for later and all that fun jazz. I think that could be really fun. Another idea I have is I was thinking of doing a solo play, but it's going to be a narrative solo play. And what would that be? So a solo narrative play would be me running a solo game of, D&D or OSR, whatever game system, right? And basically, half of the time, the video would be me explaining, okay, so, I'm rolling this up and I'm going into here and I'm fighting this monster and I'm doing whatever. But then the other half of the time, it cuts to, cutouts of the characters and me basically role-playing as the characters. And I thought that could be a really fun way to go about, basically presenting a story that, is created through solo play. And it'd be, me voice acting as, one player or one PC getting into it with, another, PC or NPC or whatever. And I think that could be a really fun time. So, streams, edits, or narrative play may be coming soon. Stupid Dragon Turtle can do one next time and play. I'm not paying. So director's commentary, lol. Whichever you choose, I look forward to seeing it. Thank you. Alrighty, I think that is going to do it for me because I have been streaming for hours and hours and hours. Yeah, that is going to do it for me, though. If you feel like you want to help me out in a non-fiscal sense, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe and share any and all videos you find appropriate. If you do feel like giving me money and want to actually get something in return, then subscribe to my Patreon, where for just $5 a month, you can get my monthly magazine filled with new mechanics, spells, random tables, backgrounds, articles, monsters, adventures, and more. Hey, $5 for a magazine, that's a steal. But that is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you to my amazing patrons who keep the lights on around here. You guys are absolutely incredible. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.